Hello and welcome to another gentle journey into history. Tonight, we will unlock the gates to a realm once forgotten, now revived through soothing narration. Whether you're nestled under your blankets or allowing the evening to slip away, I truly appreciate your company. Please share in the comments where you're joining us from. Are we separated by entire continents or simply different time zones, both gazing at the stars? If you enjoy drifting off to soft-spoken stories and reflective history, don't forget to subscribe. There's much more for us to discover together. Imagine, if you will, a world devoid of every convenience that you consider essential. No safe shelters to escape to when winter's chill envelops the land. No supermarkets filled with a plethora of food options. No clinics to mend your injuries or medications to combat sickness. No authorities to safeguard you from harm, no regulations to ensure fairness. This was the existence of our nearest evolutionary ancestors, the Neanderthals, who wandered Europe and parts of Asia for over 300,000 years before their disappearance around 40,000 years ago. However, this vanishing act wasn't abrupt. It marked the end of an extensive period of hardship in a world so harsh, so unyielding, that every day posed a struggle for existence. These were not the stereotypical cavemen of popular belief, shuffling through prehistoric times with clubs and grumbling sounds. Archaeological findings illustrate that Neanderthals were intelligent beings with intricate social systems, advanced craftsmanship, and even a sense of artistry. They honored their deceased with flowers, crafted ornaments from shells and feathers, and were possibly the first to wield fire consistently. Yet, despite their intellect and flexibility, Neanderthals endured lives filled with unimaginable brutality. Every facet of their existence was shaped by violence, scarcity, and anguish that could shatter the spirit of even the sturdiest modern human in mere days. They lived in a realm where a fractured bone could spell doom, where securing enough food for the day was never a certainty, where the chill could claim your life in slumber, and where predators much more formidable than any existing animal pursued them unceasingly. To grasp the harshness of their existence, we need to envision stepping back in time and immersing ourselves in their reality. The Europe of 100,000 years ago was vastly different from the continent we are familiar with today. Expansive ice sheets descended from the Arctic, blanketing much of northern Europe with glaciers thousands of feet thick. The climate fluctuated between intense cold spells and short, slightly warmer breaks. Still, even these warmer phases were unforgiving by our standards. Temperatures could drop unexpectedly, and a sudden cold wave could mean life or death for an entire Neanderthal group. The environment itself was a collage of tundra, sparse woodlands, and windswept grasslands. During the peak of the Ice Ages, much of Europe mirrored contemporary Siberia. Picture struggling to survive in such a setting with just stone tools, clothing made from animal hides, and makeshift shelter constructed from bones, wood, and stone. There were no metallic tools to ease labor, no domesticated animals to assist in hunting or transport, and no agriculture to ensure a steady food supply. Neanderthals were wandering hunter-gatherers, perpetually in search of sustenance and materials. They lived in small groups, generally comprising 10 to 30 individuals, usually family members. These groups were small enough to thrive on the limited resources but sufficiently large to defend against the myriad dangers they encountered daily. The social dynamics within these bands were intricate and often strained, as rivalry for resources and mates could swiftly escalate into violence. The harshness of life for Neanderthals began from the moment they were born. Infant mortality rates were alarmingly high, with estimates indicating that over half of all children did not survive to reach adulthood. The process of childbirth was perilous, often resulting in the deaths of both mother and child. Lacking modern medical knowledge and tools, complications during delivery frequently had fatal outcomes. Even for those who managed to survive birth, they encountered a myriad of diseases, accidents, and acts of violence that would diminish their numbers year after year. Those who made it through childhood entered a reality where violence was not only commonplace, but essential for survival. Neanderthals' skeletal remains exhibit evidence of numerous traumas from hunting mishaps, altercations with other Neanderthals, and encounters with predators. Fractured bones were common, and many individuals displayed signs of having endured multiple severe injuries throughout their lifetimes. The prevalence of permanent disabilities among Neanderthals suggests that their communities took care of their injured members, yet it also underscores just how perilous their everyday existence was. The hunt was central to Neanderthal life, representing perhaps the most hazardous endeavor they undertook. These were not contemporary hunters equipped with high-powered firearms who could take down game from a secure distance. Neanderthals needed to get within striking distance of their targets, close enough to plunge a spear into a charging mammoth or a woolly rhinoceros. They hunted some of the most formidable creatures that ever existed, animals capable of crushing a human with a single blow or trampling them into the frigid ground. Take the woolly mammoth, one of the primary species they pursued. These titanic beings stood as tall as 11 feet and could weigh up to 6 tons. Their tusks could measure over 16 feet in length, and their thick, coarse hair protected them against the elements and predators alike. Successfully hunting such a beast armed with only wooden spears tipped with stone points demanded extraordinary courage, skill, and teamwork. The hunt was a high-stakes endeavor, where a solitary blunder could lead to a hunter being gored, trampled, or thrown to their demise. Yet mammoths were not the only perilous targets. Neanderthals also sought cave bears, which far surpassed modern grizzly bears in size and aggression. These enormous predators could reach heights exceeding 10 feet when on their hind legs and boasted claws and teeth capable of tearing a human apart in mere seconds. Woolly rhinoceroses, with their formidable horns and volatile nature, were yet another common quarry. Even smaller game like reindeer and wild horses posed threats. If they panicked during a chase, they could trample hunters in a desperate bid for escape. The tools available to Neanderthal hunters might seem rudimentary today, but they represented the apex of Stone Age innovation. They fashioned spears from straight wooden shafts, carefully honing and fire-hardening them, then affixing meticulously crafted stone points. Named after the archaeological site where they were first uncovered, these levallois points were masterpieces in their own right. Each one required hours of diligent effort as flint knappers struck flakes from a stone core to produce a keen, symmetrical tip capable of piercing thick hides and bone. However, even the most finely crafted stone-tipped spear paled in comparison to the natural weapons wielded by their quarry. A mammoth's tusk could splinter a wooden spear shaft with ease, while a cave bear's claws could slice through the thickest of hides. Hunters had to depend on teamwork, intelligence, and unyielding resolve to take down prey that outweighed them by thousands of pounds. The hunting tactics employed by Neanderthals were as merciless as they were effective. They frequently drove herds of animals off cliffs, a strategy demanding exact timing and coordination, but which could provide a bountiful supply of meat if executed successfully. Archaeological findings throughout Europe provide clear indications of these cliff drives, showcasing heaps of broken animal bones at the foot of steep cliffs. However, this method posed significant risks for the hunters. They needed to approach the herd closely enough to instigate fear and redirect them, often placing themselves in peril of being caught up in the ensuing chaos. Another prevalent hunting strategy involved ambush tactics, with hunters concealing themselves near water sources or along migration paths, biding their time for prey to come within striking distance. This demanded extraordinary patience and self-discipline, as hunters might remain motionless for extended periods. sometimes for hours or even days, exposed to harsh weather and vulnerable to predators. The crucial moment for attack was when hunters had merely seconds to act before their quarry either fled or prepared to defend itself. When a hunt proved fruitful, a new challenge arose. Processing a mammoth carcass was an immense undertaking that necessitated the involvement of the entire group. Every section of the animal had to be utilized, as wasting anything was not an option. The meat required cutting and preparing for eating or storage. Bones were cracked open for marrow, hides were scraped and treated for clothing or shelter, and tusks, along with other useful materials, were salvaged for crafting tools and weapons. Nevertheless, success in hunting could not be counted on, and failure resulted in hunger, frailty, and possibly death. Neanderthal groups often endured bouts of starvation when prey was scarce or injuries hindered their hunting capabilities. In those times, they had to rely on scavenging whatever they could find: roots, berries, insects, and occasionally the remnants of animals taken down by other predators. The fight for these limited resources frequently sparked conflicts between groups, as desperate Neanderthals clashed over the necessary scraps for survival. The constant specter of starvation heavily influenced every facet of Neanderthal behavior. Their physiques developed to be exceptionally strong and muscular, enabling them to store fat during plentiful times to survive inevitable lean periods. Their metabolisms were fine-tuned to extract every possible calorie from their meals, and their digestive systems could handle foods that would cause modern humans severe distress. Yet, even these traits sometimes fell short in preventing hunger. Archaeological findings indicate that cannibalism was fairly common among Neanderthal groups, especially during dire shortages. Cut marks on Neanderthal bones, unearthed at various European locations, suggest that these early humans occasionally resorted to consuming their own deceased when other food options were not available. This was not the ritualistic cannibalism observed in certain human cultures, but rather a desperate response from individuals facing starvation. The choice to eat human flesh, including that of family members who had died, illustrates the profound desperation that Neanderthals occasionally confronted. The winter months were particularly harsh, as food supplies that were already limited became even scarcer. Plant-based foods vanished completely under layers of snow and ice, while many animals either migrated to warmer climates or went into hibernation. Neanderthal groups had to heavily depend on stored food during these freezing months, meticulously rationing their supplies to last until the arrival of spring. However, storage methods were rudimentary and the risk of food spoilage loomed large. Spoiled meat could lead to the starvation of an entire group. The frigid temperatures themselves served as a relentless foe, claiming lives as surely as any predator could. Hypothermia posed a constant risk, and frostbite had the potential to take fingers, toes, or even entire limbs. Neanderthals devised advanced methods for creating and sustaining fire, but fuel was frequently in short supply, and a fire that extinguished during a blizzard could spell disaster for everyone in the group. They developed shelters that offered some defense against the elements, constructing them with mammoth bones as a framework and covering them with hides and compacted earth. Nevertheless, by our standards, these structures were rudimentary and provided minimal comfort during severe weather. Clothing posed a continual issue as well. Neanderthals had mastered the art of tanning hides and crafting garments that could shield them from the weather. However, their attire was often heavy, rigid, and inadequate for the harsh conditions they encountered. Producing a single winter outfit necessitated the hides from multiple animals, which required weeks or even months of successful hunts. A tear in an essential piece of clothing could prove fatal, and the ongoing need to replace worn apparel was a relentless battle. The tools and weapons essential for Neanderthal survival also demanded frequent repairs and replacements. Stone implements would either fracture or dull from use, and locating suitable raw materials wasn't always a guarantee. Crafting stones into functional tools was an intricate skill that required years to perfect, and not every member of a group had these talents. A damaged spear tip or a blunt scraper could mean the difference between a bountiful hunt and a disaster. In addition to the relentless pursuit of food and shelter, Neanderthals contended with perilous predators that would invoke fear in any contemporary human. The Pleistocene landscape teemed with creatures that seem almost fantastical today, such as cave lions that outmatched any modern big cats. Males could weigh up to 700 pounds and sport formidable fangs designed to crush bone, viewing Neanderthals merely as another target for their predatory instincts and capable of hunting down entire family units. The short-faced bears, towering over 12 feet on their hind legs, were possibly the most frightening adversaries Neanderthals faced. These massive carnivores were engineered for swift pursuits and had the agility to chase down prey across open terrain. Their jaws possessed the strength to crush a human skull in a single bite. Coupled with their long reach, even climbing trees didn't guarantee safety. In contrast to today's bears, which are typically omnivorous and more predictable, short-faced bears were dedicated carnivores with an unquenchable hunger for meat. Saber-toothed cats, while smaller than cave lions, were arguably more perilous due to their specialized hunting methods. Their enormous canine teeth were crafted for delivering a singular, destructive bite, capable of severing critical blood vessels or crushing the windpipe. These cats operated as ambush predators, attacking unexpectedly and dispatching their prey before it even recognized the danger. Hyenas, larger and more aggressive than modern ones, presented a unique threat as they scavenged from Neanderthal hunting groups. However, they were also competent hunters themselves. Their strong jaws could break open bones to access the nutrient-rich marrow, and they wouldn't hesitate to attack humans if the opportunity arose. The chilling cackles of hyenas at night sent shivers down the spines of Neanderthal families gathered around their fires. Wolves and wild dogs hunting in coordinated packs brought down prey significantly larger than themselves. A pack of determined wolves could easily overpower a small group of Neanderthals, especially if those individuals were weakened by hunger or injury. These clever and adaptable predators learned to link human settlements with potential food, becoming bolder in their assaults. Even smaller predators were formidable threats. Leopards, adept at climbing, could strike at Neanderthals while they slept in what they thought were safe spots. Wolverines, though far smaller than the megapredators of the era, were incredibly fierce and resolute, capable of driving much larger animals away from their catches. A wolverine would rather battle to the end than yield its food, and its keen claws and teeth are capable of delivering serious injuries to anyone reckless enough to confront them. This persistent risk of predation meant that Neanderthals could never be completely at ease or let their guard down. There was always someone tasked with watching for threats, even during moments of rest. Throughout the night, different individuals would take turns staying alert, tending to the fire, and listening for sounds that might signal the approach of predators. However, fatigue was a formidable enemy, as a guard dozing off at a critical moment could jeopardize the entire group. Evidence from Neanderthal settlements points to various defensive strategies aimed at warding off predators. Fires were kept burning perpetually, serving not just for warmth and cooking, but also as a barrier against nocturnal hunters. Sharp stakes were sometimes driven into the ground around campsites to deter charging animals. Sleeping areas frequently utilized caves or rock shelters, which were easier to defend than open land, though these precautions did not guarantee complete safety, and predator attacks were a frequent reality. The mental strain of living under an ever-present threat is significant. Modern humans in conflict zones or areas plagued by high crime levels suffer from serious stress-related health issues, while Neanderthals faced dangers far more immediate and lethal than those encountered today. The constant state of alertness necessary for survival would have been mentally and physically draining, contributing to the elevated death rates and shorter lifespans that characterized Neanderthal life. Disease represented another relentless adversary that Neanderthals were ill-equipped to confront. Lacking knowledge of microbiology or medicine, they were defenseless against infections, parasites, and widespread ailments. A minor cut could easily become infected, potentially leading to blood poisoning and death. Dental issues, which might seem like minor nuisances today, could lead to intense suffering and might even become lethal if infections were to spread throughout the body. Parasites were an ever-present challenge both inside and outside the body. Intestinal worms would drain energy and vital nutrients from their hosts, while fleas, lice, and ticks transmitted diseases and caused relentless discomfort. Without access to soap or effective cleaning products, personal sanitation was hard to achieve, making infestations nearly unavoidable. Certain parasites could inflict serious health complications or even death, especially in those already weakened by hunger or injuries. Respiratory ailments posed significant dangers during the colder months when Neanderthals were huddled together in poorly ventilated living quarters. A simple cold could swiftly escalate into pneumonia, leading to fatal outcomes. Furthermore, the smoke from perpetually lit fires would have irritated the lungs and airways, increasing the likelihood of respiratory issues. Conditions such as tuberculosis and other chronic lung diseases were likely widespread, gradually debilitating individuals over months or years to the point where they could no longer aid in the group's survival. Injuries sustained during hunting and daily chores often became infected, resulting in sepsis and death. A fractured bone that failed to heal correctly could leave a person permanently impaired, unable to participate in hunting or other vital tasks. In the absence of antibiotics or surgical procedures, even small wounds could become festering sores, allowing infections to spread throughout the body. The high incidence of trauma observed in Neanderthal skeletal remains indicates that serious injuries were commonplace, and many individuals lived with ongoing pain and disabilities. Additionally, childbirth presented significant risks for Neanderthal women, with maternal mortality rates that would be startling by today's standards. The sizable heads of Neanderthal infants, coupled with the sturdy physique of adult females, frequently led to difficult childbirths. Without any medical assistance, complications during delivery often resulted in fatal outcomes for both the mother and her child. Women who managed to endure numerous births were likely regarded as highly valuable members of their communities, as their experience and ability to bear children were vital for the group's survival. The brutal realities of their life significantly influenced the social framework of Neanderthal clans. Leadership probably fell to the strongest and most skilled individuals, those capable of executing successful hunts and protecting the group from danger. This position of authority, however, came with immense responsibility and pressure. The decisions made by a leader could be the decisive factor between life and death for all members of the group, and failure could lead to violent repercussions or banishment. Competition for resources within these groups could be fierce, especially in times of scarcity. Archaeological records indicate that conflict among group members was not uncommon, with Neanderthal remains exhibiting signs of interpersonal violence. Disputes over food, mates, or authority could swiftly escalate into fatal clashes. In a world where collaboration was key to survival, the ongoing tension between individual desires and collective well-being resulted in persistent social strain. The way the elderly and disabled were treated sheds light on the compassion and practicality present in Neanderthal society. Some archaeological findings reveal individuals who overcame severe injuries or ailments that rendered them unable to participate in hunting or other vital tasks. This points to the fact that Neanderthal groups occasionally looked after their disabled members, sharing resources and offering protection even when these individuals couldn't contribute. Nonetheless, during extreme periods of scarcity, such altruism might not have been sustainable, prompting difficult decisions regarding resource distribution. Interactions among various Neanderthal groups were intricate and frequently marked by hostility. The struggle for land and resources often sparked violent encounters between neighboring clans. Archaeological findings indicate that clashes were not rare, with evidence of both massacres and defensive structures at various sites. The presence of Neanderthal remains with weapon tips embedded in them suggests that these skirmishes could result in fatalities, sometimes leading to the annihilation of entire bands by rival groups. Nevertheless, there are also signs of collaboration and exchange among these communities. The existence of common tool technologies and artistic expressions spread across extensive regions points to the sharing of ideas and skills among distant groups. This exchange might have taken place through trade, intermarriage, or temporary alliances formed for particular objectives, such as communal hunts or defense against shared dangers. The arrival of modern humans in Europe approximately 45,000 years ago introduced new challenges for Neanderthal communities. These newcomers brought advanced technologies with them, including refined projectile weapons, intricate tool-making techniques, and potentially domesticated canines. They may have been more adept hunters and better suited to the changing climatic conditions of the late Pleistocene. The competition for resources with modern humans likely heightened the already existing pressures on Neanderthal groups. Some evidence indicates that the two species occasionally clashed directly, with the advanced technology and organization of modern humans giving them a significant upper hand. However, there is also proof of interbreeding between the two species, suggesting that their relationships were not solely antagonistic. The gradual replacement of Neanderthals by modern humans didn't occur through abrupt conquest, but rather unfolded as a slow process of displacement over thousands of years. As human populations expanded and increased their territorial reach, Neanderthal groups found themselves relegated to ever more marginal environments where survival became increasingly challenging. The interplay of climate change, competition from humans, and the cumulative strains of their harsh lifestyle ultimately proved overwhelming for Neanderthal communities. Their evolved cognitive skills and intricate cultural practices could not shield them from the unyielding pressures of their surroundings. Neanderthals produced some of the earliest known artistic expressions, including cave art and carved figures. They practiced complex burial customs and might have utilized symbolic communication. Their tool-making capabilities were advanced and continuously developing, showcasing signs of creativity and adaptability. Unfortunately, sheer intelligence wasn't sufficient to overcome the fundamental survival challenges in their perilous world. The disappearance of Neanderthals around 40,000 years ago signified the conclusion of a remarkable evolutionary journey. These sturdy humans persisted for over 300,000 years in some of Earth's most unforgiving conditions, enduring ice ages, volcanic events, and constant threats from predators and diseases. They created technologies and cultural practices that allowed them to flourish in environments that could easily lead to the demise of contemporary humans. Yet despite their notable accomplishments, the Neanderthals eventually fell victim to the harsh realities of their existence. Their narrative is one of astonishing resilience amid immense hardship, as well as a sobering reminder of how fragile life can be when survival hinges entirely on individual strength, skill, and cleverness. Each day posed a struggle against elements determined to overpower them, and ultimately those elements triumphed. The skeletal remains and artifacts they left behind narrate a tale marked by violence, adversity, and suffering that is challenging for us to fully grasp. Yet they also illustrate a species that exhibited many human-like qualities. They cared for the wounded, produced art, and established intricate social bonds, all while facing the harshness of their surroundings. The trace of their existence persists in the small fraction of Neanderthal DNA found in the genomes of most contemporary humans. This genetic link serves as a reminder of our shared evolutionary past and the remarkable journey that led us to the present day. As we relax in our modern homes, surrounded by the comforts of contemporary life, it's essential to remember the brutal environment that our ancestors endured. The obstacles they encountered render our daily challenges appear insignificant in comparison. Nevertheless, they persevered for hundreds of thousands of years, driven by resilience, creativity, and an unwavering will to survive. Their narrative ultimately embodies the resilience of the human spirit against seemingly insurmountable challenges, even if that resilience was fleeting, leading to the end of their lineage. The harsh existence of the Neanderthals acts as both a humbling reminder of our progress and a sobering awareness of how swiftly our own comfortable lives could be upended if the systems and technologies we rely on were to fail us. By delving into their trials and accomplishments, we not only gain insights into our evolutionary history, but also cultivate a deeper gratitude for the extraordinary path that has shaped the world we live in today. I will continue where part 1 concluded, concentrating on the harsh realities of Neanderthal life while maintaining the engaging, descriptive style that has been established. Imagine, if you will, awakening in a world where winter was not merely a season, but rather an unforgiving executioner lasting several months. The frozen landscape of Europe during the Ice Age, where Neanderthals resided, was one that would render even the toughest winters we experience today feel like a sunny spring. As the massive glaciers inched forward, temperatures fell to lethal lows that could claim the life of an unprotected individual in mere minutes. Winter temperatures would often plunge to 40 degrees C, accompanied by frigid winds that sliced through the thickest animal skins as if they were paper. Picture yourself trying to keep a fire alive when each gust of icy wind threatens to snuff out your soul's source of heat. When your fingers become so numb from the cold that you struggle to hold the tools essential for survival. The Neanderthals encountered what researchers refer to as the last glacial maximum, a time when ice sheets blanketed extensive areas of Europe, resembling frozen graveyards. This wasn't the idyllic winter wonderland depicted in holiday cards. Instead, it was a realm of unyielding cold that turned the very air into a formidable adversary. Each breath seared the lungs, and any exposed skin faced the danger of frostbite in mere moments. However, perhaps the most daunting aspect was the psychological struggle posed by the environment on Neanderthal groups. Winter often meant being confined to whatever shelter they could manage to construct or find. Envision being confined for months in a cramped cave with your entire family group, the walls closing in as your supplies diminished and tempers flared. The darkness was nearly total, with daylight stretching only a few fleeting hours before the sun vanished beyond the horizon, leaving them in a dim world illuminated only by the flickering lights of their safeguarded fires. Sleep became a perilous luxury. Allowing the fire to die overnight could lead to frozen water supplies and the perilous risk of exposure. Someone always needed to stay awake, stoking the flames, vigilant for the subtle signs that their lifeline to survival was beginning to wane. The constant need for alertness and the unending dread of cold and darkness would have profoundly impacted their mental well-being. When spring finally came, it introduced its own distinct challenges. The melting ice could cause tremendous floods, washing away months' worth of meticulously collected supplies in just a few hours. Rivers transformed into violent torrents that could divide families and hunting groups, sometimes for good. The land morphed into a hazardous quagmire of mud and stagnant water, making travel nearly impossible and creating ideal conditions for disease-spreading insects. Yet, Neanderthals faced more than just the harsh elements. They were embroiled in a savage struggle for survival against some of the most formidable predators known to history. The European landscapes of their era were inhabited by creatures that would make even a present-day lion or bear seem mild in comparison. Cave bears reaching nearly 12 feet tall on their hind legs occupied the very shelters that Neanderthals desperately required for safety. These were not the relatively small black bears familiar to us today, but rather enormous, aggressive beasts with claws resembling daggers and jaws strong enough to crush skulls with a single bite. Imagine a Neanderthal family approaching what appears to be the perfect cave shelter as winter draws near, only to find clear signs of cave bear occupancy, massive claw marks etched into the stone walls and the overpowering musk that signals the presence of a predator capable of killing without a second thought. Do they choose to confront the bear for the shelter they need to survive, or do they continue their search as precious daylight dwindles and temperatures plummet? Even more horrifying were the cave lions, prehistoric felines that were significantly larger than their modern African relatives. These animals were not simply larger versions of today's lions, they were apex predators uniquely suited to hunt the gigantic prey of Ice Age Europe, which included Neanderthals themselves. Their approach to hunting relied heavily on patience and discretion, tracking their targets for extended periods before executing rapid, stealthy strikes that were often lethal. The traces of these confrontations are etched into the remains of Neanderthals discovered across Europe. Puncture marks align with the arrangement of cave lion teeth, defensive fractures on forearms from attempts to block attacks, and skulls showcasing clear evidence of savage bites. These were not mere random occurrences, but regular terrors faced by each Neanderthal group. Hyena packs posed another persistent danger, particularly formidable due to their group hunting strategies and their tendency to scavenge near human settlements. Unlike the hyenas we know today, these prehistoric behemoths were audacious enough to assault healthy adult humans, especially in times of food scarcity. At night, they prowled around Neanderthal camps, their eerie calls reverberating in the dark as they waited for any hint of vulnerability. Among the most alarming threats were the short-faced bears, creatures so gigantic and ferocious that they commanded the landscapes they roamed. Reaching up to 6 feet at the shoulder and weighing more than a ton, these bear species primarily fed on meat and showed no trepidation towards humans. If a short-faced bear chose to claim the spoils from a Neanderthal hunt, there was no room for negotiation or intimidation. The option was stark. Either yield your hard-earned food or confront imminent death. The psychological toll of existing with such constant peril was immense. Every shadow held the potential for death, and every rustle in the night could herald an assault. Neanderthal children grew up with the awareness that straying even briefly from the group might make them targets. The strain of this unending watchfulness likely accelerated their aging, impacting their already limited lifespans. Yet despite facing immense challenges, Neanderthal communities not only endured, but also devised intricate strategies to navigate their encounters with mega-predators. They became adept at interpreting the faint indicators signifying the presence of cave bears, identifying cave lions' territorial markings, and predicting the hunting behaviors of hyena packs. This wasn't solely about survival. It represented a nuanced comprehension of predator behavior that facilitated their coexistence with formidable creatures capable of effortlessly ending their lives. Archaeological findings imply that Neanderthals occasionally confronted these enormous predators directly, not from a place of bravado, but out of sheer necessity. Just think about the valor it took to confront a cave bear armed only with stone-tipped spears and wooden clubs, fully aware that failure could lead not just to individual demise, but possibly the destruction of their entire family group. Yet they repeatedly undertook this perilous task, leaving behind traces of successful hunts that involved some of the most perilous animals known to have existed. The weapons created for these encounters highlight the creativity born of urgent need. Neanderthal spears were not the simplistic pointed sticks often portrayed in media. Instead, they were meticulously crafted tools aimed at achieving maximum penetration and effect. Their wooden shafts were fire-hardened to bolster strength, and the stone points were shaped with a precision that even contemporary flint knappers find challenging to replicate. These were not merely convenience tools, they were vital instruments of survival, forged by individuals who understood that their existence hinged on the quality of their craftsmanship. Nevertheless, even the finest spear provided little solace when pitted against a predator that vastly outmatched them in size and possessed natural weaponry far superior to what human ingenuity could devise. The stark reality was that most encounters with mega-predators culminated in retreat, resource abandonment, or loss of life. The few instances of victorious encounters came at staggering costs, often resulting in injuries that could be fatal, even if the immediate skirmish was successful. This ongoing peril from predators influenced every element of Neanderthal culture. They could not risk sending their most formidable hunters into the wild alone. However, dispersing their defensive strength too widely left the entire group vulnerable. Children had to be restrained from playing freely, but limiting their movement impaired their development of essential survival abilities. Each choice made was a calculated gamble in a world where a single mistake could mean death, not solely for individuals, but for entire lineages. The strain of such a life is apparent in the skeletal remains of Neanderthals, which display signs of chronic malnutrition, repeated injuries, and early aging. These weren't the bones of individuals who enjoyed comfortable lives occasionally disrupted by hardships. Rather, they belonged to those who battled for survival every single day from birth until death claimed them at ages we consider tragically young. Yet, amidst this harrowing fight for existence, Neanderthals somehow managed to find the time and energy to create art, ceremonially bury their dead, and care for the disabled within their communities. Cave paintings uncovered in Spain demonstrate that even while facing extinction, they felt compelled to leave behind evidence of their existence, to infuse beauty into a world that offered them so little. These artistic endeavors were not the pastimes of a society living in comfort. They were fervent declarations of humanity in the face of overwhelming adversity. The compassion they exhibited towards their disabled and elderly community members perhaps highlights the most extraordinary feature of Neanderthal culture. In a reality where every individual needed to contribute for survival, they still extended support to those who could no longer hunt or gather effectively. Skeletal remains have been uncovered of Neanderthals who managed to survive for extended periods despite disabilities that would have necessitated reliance on others for support. This signifies more than mere compassion. It speaks volumes about their values as a species. A particularly poignant case comes from a site in Iraq, where scientists found the remains of a Neanderthal man who had endured severe disabilities, including total blindness, a shrunken arm, and significant wounds that would have rendered him unable to assist with hunting or gathering. However, evidence points to him having lived for many years in this state, cared for by his community. In an environment where resources were critically limited and survival was never assured, these individuals opted to share their scant resources with someone unable to offer anything tangible in return. This kindness also extended to how they treated the deceased, as evidenced by burial customs that indicate a belief in some type of afterlife or at the very least, the significance of honoring those who had died. They interred their dead with tools, food, and personal belongings, showcasing a complex comprehension of death as a transition rather than merely an end. Some graves even contained flowers and other ephemeral items, hinting at rituals that involved the entire community in bidding farewell to the departed. Perhaps most remarkably, indications suggest they expressed grief. Evidence shows that certain Neanderthal grave sites were revisited frequently, with further offerings placed there over prolonged intervals. This was not just the act of disposing of the dead, but an ongoing connection with those who had slipped away, a refusal to allow death to sever the ties that unified their communities. These insights into Neanderthal compassion render their ultimate disappearance even more heartbreaking. This was a species that had endured ice ages, faced down formidable predators, and preserved their cultural practices for hundreds of thousands of years. They had crafted advanced tools, produced artwork, cared for those with disabilities, and honored their deceased. Time and again, they demonstrated their intelligence, adaptability, and strength. However, as modern humans began to spread into Europe around 40,000 years ago, the lengthy dominance of the Neanderthals was nearing its conclusion. The struggle for resources in a world that was already unforgiving intensified even further. Modern humans introduced novel technologies, new hunting methods, and crucially, larger social networks that facilitated more effective collaboration and resource distribution. The final centuries of the Neanderthals were characterized by increasingly dire situations. Their numbers dwindled and became more separated, rendering them susceptible to inbreeding and genetic bottlenecks. Their well-established hunting territories were increasingly claimed by modern human groups who were often better organized and equipped. The climate was also turning progressively harsher, with the arrival of the last glacial maximum making survival more challenging than ever before. Archaeological findings from their last refugees in Spain and Portugal depict a society struggling at the edge of survival. Their tools grew less advanced, indicating that the expertise required to produce their finest instruments was fading as their populations shrank. Their living spaces became smaller and more transient, signifying a group perpetually forced to move, unable to form the stable communities that had defined their earlier way of life. Nevertheless, even in those final desperate times, they preserved their core humanity. They continued to lay their deceased to rest, to care for their disabled, and to create art whenever possible, despite the scarcity of resources. Right until the very end, they remained undeniably the same beings who had for so long against overwhelming challenges. The last identified Neanderthal met their end in solitude in a cave in Gibraltar roughly 28,000 years ago, the last representative of a lineage that had thrived for over 400,000 years. With their demise, a distinct phase of human evolution concluded. This loss carried away a wealth of wisdom, culture, and the experiences of generations who persevered in one of the harshest environments ever faced by humanity. Yet their influence persists in ways they could never have foreseen. Modern humans possess Neanderthal DNA within their genetic makeup. This enduring reminder illustrates that our species did not merely replace them, we blended with them. The tools and methods they developed shaped human technological advancements for millennia after their extinction. Their artistic expression sparked inquiries about consciousness and creativity that remain subjects of intrigue among scientists today. Most significantly, their narrative highlights the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. Confronted by life-threatening cold, predators capable of crushing skulls, and persistent hunger lurking just one unsuccessful hunt away, Neanderthals not only survived, but also upheld their humanity. They loved, mourned, innovated, and nurtured one another right until the end. Their harsh reality was a testament to what our species can withstand when survival is paramount. Yet their empathy, artistry, and rituals remind us that even amidst dire circumstances, humans strive to maintain their dignity and infuse meaning into their lives. Although the Neanderthals have vanished, the fortitude they exhibited in the face of overwhelming challenges continues to motivate us today. This serves as a reminder that regardless of how bleak the world may seem, the human spirit can prevail. Having explored this summary and the reference materials you've shared, I will proceed with the next segment regarding the brutal existence of Neanderthals, focusing on their social structures, familial relationships, and the stark realities of survival in their unforgiving environment. The harsh truths of Neanderthal life went far beyond merely the challenges of securing food and shelter. Their societal structure was intertwined with connections that represented both their strongest attributes and their most significant vulnerabilities. In the flickering glow of cave fires, families gathered closely against the biting chill, realizing that survival relied not only on personal resilience, but also on the fragile ties that held their small groups together. Picture, if you can, a typical Neanderthal family unit, comprised of around 15 to 20 individuals connected by kinship and necessity, traversing the terrain in a relentless quest for sustenance. The elderly matriarch, despite her age-worn hands, still adeptly prepared hides, even as her joints throbbed with arthritis. The dominant male, marked by scars from countless run-ins with predators and rival clans, claimed authority through a combination of strength and cunning. The mothers, either perpetually expecting or nursing their young, bore the physical toll of an unyielding cycle of childbirth in an existence where half of all infants did not survive past their 5th winter. These individuals were not the romanticized noble savages of popular imagination. They were desperate people enduring desperate circumstances where each choice was laden with the gravity of life and death. When food scarcity struck, which occurred all too frequently, the group confronted harrowing decisions. The weaker members might be left behind to perish, and the injured, if unable to continue, could be deserted with only a few tools and a hope for any benevolent deities they believed watched over them. Yet amid this harsh existence, there were also moments of profound compassion. Archaeological findings indicate that Neanderthals tended to their disabled companions, sometimes for many years. At the Shanidar cave site located in Iraq, researchers uncovered the remains of a Neanderthal male who lived for decades despite being blind in one eye, having a deformed arm, and moving with a pronounced limp. Someone once nourished him, shielded him, and held his presence in such regard that they carried this burden through numerous migrations and severe winters. This dual nature shaped every aspect of Neanderthal society. They exhibited remarkable compassion alongside ruthless practicality, often oscillating between the two within the span of a single day, and sometimes even a moment. A mother could tenderly care for her ill child while concurrently preparing to forsake her elderly parent if the group could not afford to pause for any weakness. Communication among them likely involved a blend of rudimentary speech, gestures, and vocalizations. Envision attempting to orchestrate a mammoth hunt or delineate territorial boundaries with such primitive linguistic capabilities. Any miscommunication could spiral into aggression. Each diplomatic failure might trigger conflict with neighboring tribes, and warfare for Neanderthals could mean the risk of extinction for the defeated. The children within these communities experienced a very different kind of childhood than we envision today. By the age of 6 or 7, they were anticipated to play significant roles in ensuring survival. Boys were taught to track animals and create tools, their small hands expertly guided by their fathers as they fashioned sharp flint points. Meanwhile, girls acquired the myriad skills necessary for foraging, food preparation, and processing hides that ensured the group's sustenance and protection from the elements. There was no room for leisure, no indulgent innocence. Each day was a quest for survival, with every error carrying the weight of a possible death sentence. The dynamics of their relationships were likely harsh and pragmatic. In a world where genetic variety equated to survival, women were invaluable resources to be safeguarded, contested, and dominated. Instances of sexual violence were likely prevalent, not necessarily from malice, but seen as a grim reproductive tactic in a species teetering towards extinction. While pair bonding existed, it invariably took a back seat to the imperative of group survival. If seizing another man's partner improved your lineage's prospects, violence was often the inevitable consequence. The strain of their harsh reality was evident in every facet of their existence. Remains of Neanderthals exhibit signs of ongoing stress, nutritional deficiencies, and recurrent traumas. Their teeth were severely worn down, having been used as tools. Scars from multiple fractures marked their bones, with many having healed improperly, leading to lasting disabilities. The typical lifespan was likely around 30 years, and those who managed to reach old age did so as frail, pain-ridden individuals who had endured a lifetime filled with hardship. Conflicts over territory were common and brutal. Encounters between differing groups in the wilderness rarely ended amicably. With resources being so limited, sharing was perceived as a vulnerability, and vulnerability signified death. Evidence from archaeological sites supports instances of cannibalism, which were not necessarily ceremonial, but rather practical. In times of starvation, the remains of fallen adversaries offered vital protein, which could be the deciding factor between life and death. The psychological burden of this way of life is nearly unfathomable. Picture living in unending anxiety, never certain if the day would yield a successful hunt or an empty stomach, a secure campsite or an onslaught from enemies. The levels of stress hormones in their bodies would have been persistently elevated, resulting in shorter lifespans and weakened immune systems. Conditions such as depression, anxiety, and what we might now classify as post-traumatic stress disorder were likely rampant. Although they lacked the concepts and treatments for these issues, their spiritual beliefs, as limited as they might have been, likely revolved around appeasing the harsh forces governing their destiny. The evidence indicates that they buried their deceased with goods, suggesting some belief in an afterlife. Nevertheless, this belief was probably not a comforting one. Their deities, if they indeed had them, were likely viewed as unpredictable and harsh, demanding sacrifices while offering little in return. Every ritual and every offering was likely driven more by fear than by faith. Women encountered specific struggles in this harsh environment. In the Paleolithic era, pregnancy often meant a fatal outcome. Lacking modern medical insights, childbirth complications resulted in the deaths of countless mothers. Those who managed to survive were tasked with nursing their newborns while keeping up with the relentless demands of a nomadic lifestyle. Menstruation without adequate hygiene measures left women susceptible to infections and frailty during vital moments. The elders, if they were allowed to live, became stores of wisdom. A grandmother who recalled which plants were safe to eat, which water supplies were reliable, and where the herds would move in times of scarcity, was invaluable for survival. However, this wisdom came at a significant price. To reach an age where one could share such knowledge meant enduring decades of unimaginable trials, witnessing the loss of most of one's offspring, and experiencing the gradual decline of one's body under the incessant pressure of survival. Their artistic expressions, when they manifested, likely stemmed from the same profound craving for purpose that fuels all human creativity. The cave paintings we have uncovered were not mere leisurely artistic pursuits, they served as urgent messages, endeavors to find meaning in a world seemingly bent on their destruction. Every handprint marked into the cave walls was a testament to existence, a poignant cry that proclaimed, "I was here, I survived, I mattered." The crafting of tools was both an art form and a crucial matter of survival. A poorly made spear tip could lead to a failed hunt and starvation, while an ineffective scraper might result in poorly prepared hides, risking hypothermia when winter arrived. The pressure to master these skills was tremendous. Failure often meant not just individual demise, but also the potential death of the whole group relying on one's expertise. Fire represented perhaps their most significant technological advancement, yet it also brought constant worry. Losing fire equated to death, especially during winter. Someone needed to tend to the flames, carefully maintaining their precious fuel supply. The firekeeper bore the weight of the entire group's survival, and the responsibility was immense. Picture the dread of awakening to find the fire almost extinguished, with only faint embers glowing while a blizzard raged outside and no dry tinder was to be found. Their connection to the natural world was characterized by a relentless struggle and moments of occasional harmony. They became adept at interpreting subtle signals that indicated shifts in weather, the movement of herds, or the approach of predators. Yet nature was never truly on their side. It was a merciless master, demanding unceasing vigilance and showing no compassion for errors. Each season brought its own set of challenges and potential disasters. The genetic bottlenecks that ultimately led to the Neanderthals' demise were likely imperceptible to them, but their effects would have reverberated through generations. Birth defects, stillbirths, and genetic disorders would have likely been more frequent as their genetic diversity dwindled. Children born into such a harsh environment without medical care faced short and painful lives, which added another layer of tragedy to an already brutal existence. When trade or interaction with other groups occurred, it was often fraught with peril. Meeting strangers could offer new resources, genetic diversity, or technological advancements, but it could just as easily lead to violence, theft, or illness. The choice to engage with or steer clear of other humans was a continuous evaluation of risk versus reward, with survival always in jeopardy. The final centuries of Neanderthals as modern humans spread through their territories must have been particularly devastating. These newcomers brought with them superior tools, more complex social structures, and diseases to which the Neanderthals had no resistance. The competition for resources grew fiercer, and Neanderthals found themselves outmatched continually. They were witnessing the collapse of their world without the understanding necessary to grasp the magnitude of what was happening around them. Even in their final refuges in the far-flung areas of Europe, where they endured long after modern humans made their presence known, the Neanderthals continued to confront the harsh forces that had consistently marked their lives. They evolved, they managed to survive, they showed resilience. Yet, in the end, the arithmetic of survival turned against them. Their populations were insufficient, their resources were scarce, and their environment was extremely unforgiving. As we reflect on their final moments, with the last Neanderthal inhaling their final breath in some obscure cave, we must recognize that this signaled the closure of a lineage that thrived for more than 300,000 years. They had weathered ice ages, volcanic winters, and numerous disasters. They expressed creativity through art, constructed intricate tools, and exhibited profound empathy toward those around them. They experienced love, joy, sorrow, and hope, just as we do today. Their legacy resonates within our DNA, reminding us of the striking similarities we share with these ancient relatives who faced a world marked by challenges far more severe than our own. In their trials, we witness our capacity for both cruelty and kindness, for creation and destruction. They were not the primitive savages often portrayed in popular narratives, but intricate beings striving to navigate an unyielding world, much like ourselves. The harsh existence of Neanderthals was not merely a tale of suffering and struggle. It was a tribute to the unquenchable spirit that compels all humans to survive, to find purpose, and to aspire for better circumstances. In their remains and artifacts, in their artistry and burial practices, we uncover the reflections of our own humanity, shaped by unimaginable hardship. They remind us that survival transcends mere strength or intelligence. It hinges on the connections we cultivate with one another and the bravery we summon to confront each new day, regardless of how harsh the world may appear. Based on the script summary and research materials you've shared, here's the fourth installment detailing the harsh existence of Neanderthals. Even during the most challenging times, when the grip of winter threatened to break their spirits entirely, Neanderthals showcased a remarkable capacity for kindness that would humble those of us today. Archaeological findings reveal astonishing insights into these supposedly primitive individuals. They offered care to their disabled comrades with a compassion that resonates deeply with our understanding of humanity. Take, for example, the remains unearthed at Shanidar Cave in Iraq, where scientists found the skeleton of a Neanderthal man who survived for decades despite being born with significant disabilities. His right arm had developed improperly, resulting in a severely atrophied limb that rendered hunting impossible. Additionally, he was blind in one eye and his body exhibited numerous scars from past injuries. In a world where survival favored the strong, he should have succumbed in infancy, yet he did not. He lived for 40 years, nurtured, safeguarded, and cherished by his clan. They could have chosen to abandon him when resources dwindled and the burden of his care grew too heavy. Instead, they opted for compassion over practicality, humanity over cold survival instinct. Upon his passing, they laid him to rest with the same respect afforded to their most esteemed hunters, adorning his grave with wildflowers, potentially marking one of the earliest known funeral rites in human history. This wasn't an isolated incident of Neanderthal benevolence. Across Europe, archaeologists have uncovered traces of a society that refused to forsake its most vulnerable. Elderly individuals plagued by crippling arthritis, children born with genetic discrepancies, and adults with severe injuries were all tenderly supported until their natural deaths. The skeleton known as La Chapelle reveals yet another extraordinary narrative. This elderly Neanderthal male had lost the majority of his teeth, rendering him unable to chew the tough meat that constituted the foundation of their diet. His jaw had deteriorated, his spine twisted from age, and walking must have been excruciating. Nevertheless, his bones indicate that he survived for years while being entirely reliant on others. Someone within his group had to chew his food for him, assist him with walking, and ensure he remained warm during the harsh winters. In our contemporary society, known for its compassion and medical support, we still find it challenging to replicate the unwavering dedication that these ancient individuals demonstrated towards their most vulnerable members. They lacked hospitals, social services, or government assistance to alleviate the burden of caregiving. All they had were their hearts and hands, and they employed both with complete commitment. This compassion wasn't limited to the living, though. The Neanderthals practiced elaborate burial customs that indicate a complex understanding of death and possibly an early notion of an afterlife. They didn't merely dispose of their deceased, as other animals do. Instead, they honored their dead through ceremonies that required substantial effort and resources. Archaeologists have uncovered Neanderthal graves across Europe, which reflect deep sorrow and enduring love. Bodies were positioned with care, often curled up in fetal positions as if in slumber. Tools and weapons accompanied them, implying a belief that these items would be necessary in whatever realm lay ahead. Certain graves featured traces of ochre, a red pigment potentially used to decorate the deceased, perhaps to restore a semblance of life to their pale, lifeless skin. The burial site at La Farasie in France tells the poignant tale of a Neanderthal family grieving the loss of a young child. The tiny body was buried with remarkable care, encircled by painstakingly arranged stones and accompanied by a collection of exquisite flint tools. The meticulous care and dedication involved in these burial rituals indicated deep emotional pain from those grieving, particularly from parents who couldn't bear to let the death of their child go unacknowledged. These practices extended beyond mere functional disposal of remains. They required thoughtful preparation, teamwork, and a considerable investment of time and resources. In an environment where each calorie counted and every moment could drastically affect survival, the Neanderthals invested their limited resources into honoring their deceased, showcasing a profound emotional and spiritual existence that contradicts the typical views of them as brutish beings. The renowned burial at Shanidar offers perhaps the most lyrical insight into Neanderthal funeral rites. When archaeologists analyzed the soil surrounding one skeleton, they uncovered clusters of pollen from at least 8 distinct flower kinds, including hollyhock, bachelor's button, groundsel, and grape hyacinth, among others. These were not just random plants that accidentally drifted into the cave. They were deliberately chosen blossoms, many known for their healing properties, intentionally arranged around the body. Picture the scenario. A sorrowful family foraging for wildflowers on the mountainside, each blossom selected with great thoughtfulness. Perhaps they chose the bachelor's button for its striking blue hue, the hollyhock for its impressive stature and grace, and the grape hyacinth for its delightful scent. They positioned these flowers around their loved one's body like a vibrant tapestry, turning a stark cave into a sanctuary of remembrance. This gesture of adorning the deceased with flowers, an act we still practice in our modern funeral customs, highlights a sensitivity and aesthetic appreciation that dismantles every primitive stereotype. They were not mere savages struggling instinctively for survival. They were individuals who recognized beauty in flowers, who acknowledged that death deserved respect, and who believed that love could transcend beyond the grave. The emotional depth demonstrated through their rituals indicates that Neanderthals experienced grief comparable to our own. They felt the unbearable sorrow of losing a child, the deep void left by the death of an elder, the urgent desire to honor and remember those who meant so much to them. Their tears fell on the same soil where they had shared joy, love, and aspirations. Yet perhaps the most astonishing find emerged from a cave in Spain, where researchers unearthed what might be the earliest known instance of adoption. A young Neanderthal child, genetically unrelated to the adults surrounding him, had been nurtured as part of the family. His bones revealed the same level of care and nourishment typically given to biological children, and upon his death, he was interred with the same respect. In a world where resources were limited and survival was a daily struggle, this family chose to take in an orphan who was not their own, providing him sustenance when food was scarce, shielding him from threats, and loving him as if he were their own kin. When he passed away, they mourned him as any devoted parent would grieve for their child. This act of adoption illuminates significant aspects of Neanderthal society. They recognized that family extended beyond genetic ties, emphasizing choice, commitment, and love. They fostered relationships that transcended mere biology, creating communities rooted in compassion rather than simply the struggle for survival. Still, alongside this remarkable capacity for affection, the Neanderthals lived under the persistent threat of violence and loss. Their skeletal remains recount tales of lives interrupted by predators, accidents, and the indiscriminate harshness of the environment. Numerous children didn't survive to see their first winter. Many adults died before they could impart their wisdom and skills to the next generation. The brutal reality of survival dictated that even the most devoted Neanderthal parents faced impossible decisions. When food became scarce, who would be fed first? The powerful hunter who could sustain the group, or the aged grandmother who could not contribute when threats loomed, who was defended and who was abandoned? These were not straightforward choices made by heartless beings, but heart-wrenching decisions that weighed heavily on the hearts of individuals who cared deeply and mourned intensely. Archaeological findings indicate that certain Neanderthal groups engaged in a type of triage during the most severe times, prioritizing the survival of those most capable of supporting the group's endurance. Yet even these rational decisions appeared to be made with great sorrow. Remains of individuals who deceased during these dire times exhibit signs of intentional burial when resources permitted, implying that even unavoidable sacrifices were lamented and honored. The Neanderthals had the capacity for both brutality and tenderness, embodying both harsh realism and profound compassion, much like our own human nature. They weren't simplistic creatures driven purely by primal instincts. Rather, they were complex beings grappling with the same ethical quandaries that confront us today. In their efforts to balance survival with empathy, we find reflections of our own deepest struggles. When we contemplate their legacy, we're compelled to face unsettling inquiries about our present world. In this era of plenty and medical wonders, do we exhibit the same steadfast dedication to our vulnerable populations that these ancient individuals demonstrated? Do we pay tribute to our deceased with akin reverence? Do we extend our compassion to orphaned children with similar generosity? The Neanderthals had ample reasons to be self-serving, prioritizing survival over kindness. They existed in a realm far harsher than ours, where death loomed over every decision and comfort was a rare luxury. Nonetheless, they chose love. They chose to support the disabled, to honor their deceased, to take in the orphaned. They opted to embrace humanity in its truest form. Their narrative illustrates that humanity is not solely characterized by our inventions or advancements, but by our capacity to choose kindness when it would be simpler to act selfishly, to seek beauty amid chaos, to offer love even when it seems futile. Within the dim glow of their cave fires, encircled by threats we can hardly contemplate, Neanderthals uncovered insights about human behavior that we are still grappling with today. The arrival of the Black Death heralded one of the most catastrophic chapters in their history. Although this plague would emerge significantly later in human history, for our ancient ancestors, illness was a far more relentless and unforgiving presence than it would be for populations in the medieval era. Unlike their distant successors who would confront the bubonic plague, Neanderthals lacked a comprehension of contagion, did not possess ancestral herbal remedies, and had no monasteries to care for the ill. When a disease struck a Neanderthal group, it often spelled doom, not just for the individual sufferer, but potentially for the entire community. Respiratory ailments were especially lethal in the chilly, damp caves where Neanderthals sought refuge. The close quarters that offered warmth and security also fostered ideal circumstances for disease to swiftly propagate among family members. A common cold could spiral into pneumonia, and lacking any form of medical intervention, even the most formidable hunters could succumb within days. Parasitic infections perpetually plagued Neanderthal societies. Archaeological findings indicate that these early humans endured intestinal worms, skin parasites, and blood-sucking insects that drained their vitality and exposed them to further diseases. The very process of butchering animals and handling raw flesh put them at risk of harmful pathogens that their immune systems had never encountered. Dental issues were yet another source of ongoing discomfort and potentially serious infections. Lacking access to dental care, broken or infected teeth could result in serious infections that might spread to the brain or different parts of the body. Many Neanderthal remains exhibit signs of significant dental ailments, which would have inflicted intense pain and made eating challenging. Skin infections and septic wounds were frequent causes of death. A simple cut from a tool or an animal claw could easily become infected, resulting in gangrene or sepsis. Without the benefit of antiseptics or antibiotics, even minor injuries carried the risk of being fatal within days. The emotional burden of witnessing loved ones suffer and succumb to ailments they were unable to comprehend or remedy must have been immense. Neanderthal groups likely created their own rudimentary medical practices, potentially utilizing specific plants noted for their healing properties when observed in animals or applying mud and foliage to injuries. Nevertheless, these remedies proved largely ineffective against serious diseases. Malnutrition compromised Neanderthal immune systems, rendering them more vulnerable to infections. During particularly harsh winters or times of food scarcity, their bodies became susceptible to opportunistic illnesses. Deficiencies in vitamins from an inadequate diet led to ailments such as scurvy and rickets, further deteriorating their health. Childbirth posed significant dangers for Neanderthal women, especially in the absence of medical assistance during complications. Many mothers and infants perished during or shortly after childbirth, resulting in devastating losses for small family units that relied on every individual for survival. The elevated infant mortality rates hindered Neanderthal populations from sustaining stable numbers. Tuberculosis was likely prevalent within Neanderthal communities, spread through the air in their enclosed cave habitats. This debilitating disease would have gradually ravaged its victims, causing them to cough blood and slowly fade away over a span of months or even years. Witnessing a family member slowly succumb to tuberculosis would have been a source of ongoing torment. Zoonotic diseases stemming from the animals they hunted presented an additional relentless hazard. Illnesses like anthrax from contaminated carcasses, tularemia from rabbits, and various viral infections from birds could easily transfer to humans. Neanderthals had no means of identifying which animals were safe to touch or eat. Instances of food poisoning were common, particularly in warmer seasons when meat spoiled rapidly. Lacking refrigeration or knowledge of food safety, Neanderthals often had little choice but to consume meat that was partially decayed, resulting in severe gastrointestinal problems that could be deadly in their already weakened condition. The pressure of constant survival likely further weakened their immune systems. The ongoing stress of sourcing food, evading predators, and safeguarding their families would have kept their bodies perpetually in a state of alertness, making them more susceptible to illness. When disease did outbreak within a Neanderthal group, it could mean the difference between survival and extinction for the entire group. If the key hunters fell ill, the community could swiftly face starvation. If mothers died, infants stood little chance of survival. The interconnectedness of their small family units meant that illness had ripple effects throughout the community. Archaeological findings hint that some Neanderthal groups attempted to care for their ailing or disabled members, which suggests a degree of compassion and social organization. Nevertheless, faced with limited resources and harsh environmental factors, tough decisions had to be made regarding whom to support and whom might need to be left behind. The persistent danger of disease influenced every aspect of Neanderthal life and social structure. They lived with the awareness that any day could bring an illness capable of ending their lives or devastating their families. This unpredictability added a further layer of anxiety to their already harsh lives. When we explore the medical difficulties experienced by Neanderthals, we gain a deeper understanding of their tenacity and the unfortunate conditions that ultimately contributed to their demise. Illness was more than just an occasional peril. It was a relentless spectre that accompanied them throughout their brief, grueling existence in a world that showed no leniency towards the weak or unfortunate. In conjunction with the immediate dangers posed by predators and violence, Neanderthals contended with an even more insidious foe that trailed them through every season: disease. In an era devoid of medicine, antibiotics, or even a fundamental grasp of sanitation, falling ill was akin to receiving a death sentence. The cramped quarters of Neanderthal caves proved to be ideal breeding grounds for pathogens that could rapidly spread among family units. Picture seeking warmth together in a damp cave during the frigid winter months, inhaling the same contaminated air as sick relatives. Respiratory illnesses would sweep through these tight-knit communities with lethal efficiency. A mere cold could spiral into pneumonia, snatching away the lives of the young, elderly, and frail within mere days. The very caves that offered protection from predators transformed into lethal traps as disease took root. Archaeological findings paint a grim picture of Neanderthal health, with skeletal remains revealing signs of chronic infection, fractures that healed poorly, and dental abscesses that would have induced agonizing pain. In the absence of proper medical wisdom, even minor injuries could turn into life-threatening infections. A small cut from a stone tool or a bite from an animal could escalate into sepsis and death. The unforgiving environment perpetually hammered their immune systems. Malnutrition compromised their natural defenses, rendering them susceptible to every pathogen they encountered. In times when food was hard to find, their weakened condition rendered them vulnerable to the tiny microorganisms that thrived in their filthy living environments. Additionally, parasites posed another ongoing torment. Intestinal worms transmitted through dirty water and contaminated food gradually drained their vitality and nutritional resources. These internal pests led to persistent diarrhea, abdominal discomfort, and a steady decline in health. Children, in particular, were at higher risk, with many succumbing to serious parasite infestations before they could even reach adulthood. The absence of medical understanding meant that conditions that could have been treated often resulted in fatal outcomes. Issues like appendicitis, kidney stones, or complications during childbirth took numerous lives. Mothers often perished during labor, leaving infants to navigate a perilous world without maternal support. The rate of infant death was alarming, with estimates indicating that as many as 50% of Neanderthal children did not survive to see their 5th birthday. Outbreaks of illness could sweep through entire populations, and as diseases spread among the closely knit groups that comprised Neanderthal society, there was no escape or means to care for the afflicted. Whole family lines could vanish in mere weeks, leaving only scattered remains to mark their presence. The ongoing threat of illness influenced every facet of Neanderthal life. The anxiety over potential sickness added an extra layer of strain to their already unstable existence. They lived with the awareness that any day could herald the arrival of an unknown illness, slowly eroding their life. This psychological weight, in tandem with the physical demands of their harsh environment, created a perfect storm of suffering. Joint troubles were common among older Neanderthals, with arthritis often developing early due to their demanding physical lifestyle. The relentless strain from hunting, foraging, and crafting tools severely impacted their physical well-being. As they reached middle age, numerous individuals would have been afflicted by joint pain and mobility challenges, becoming liabilities within their already struggling groups. Oral health issues were widespread, as tooth decay and abscesses inflicted relentless suffering. Lacking any form of dental treatment, Decayed teeth would decompose within their mouths, leading to painful facial swelling and potentially lethal infections. The agony would have been excruciating, making it tough to consume the tough, coarse fare that constituted their diet. Skin ailments and infections were constant adversaries in their unsanitary living conditions. Injuries from hunting mishaps or confrontations with predators had slim chances of healing correctly in the bacteria-ridden caves. Chronic skin infections and festering sores compounded their everyday suffering, attracting flies and heightening the risk of disease transmission. The mental strain of enduring the constant threat of illness cannot be minimized. Witnessing family members wither away from unspecified ailments, observing children perish from seemingly sudden conditions, and realizing their own bodies were deteriorating day by day created a lingering atmosphere of fear and hopelessness. Yet, amidst these profound medical difficulties, certain Neanderthals exhibited extraordinary resilience. Archaeological findings show individuals who endured severe injuries and survived for years afterward, indicating that their communities occasionally provided care for the ill and disabled. This kindness in the face of such tough adversities reflects the richness of their humanity. Ultimately, the narrative surrounding Neanderthal health reveals a tale of bravery in confronting insurmountable odds. They faced each day aware that illness could emerge unexpectedly. Still, they persisted in loving, caring for their families and constructing their simple societies. Their battle against sickness and injury was merely another chapter in the harsh saga of their existence, a reflection of the immense challenges our early ancestors faced as they fought for their existence. The medieval era was marked by extraordinary violence, where mere survival became a daily struggle against both human threats and natural adversities. Through our examination of clan conflicts, the trials of commoners, and the horrific toll of the Black Death, it's clear that everyday life for the average person was riddled with constant instability and difficulty. Yet amid this bleakness, we uncover inspiring examples of human determination and creativity, alongside the emergence of urban centres and new obstacles. As we proceed with our exploration of medieval Scotland, we must shift our focus to the growing urban hubs that began to appear across the landscape. While the majority of Scots remained engaged in agrarian duties, an increasing number were attracted to the boroughs, fortified settlements that presented both new opportunities and new risks in equal measure. These early Scottish towns were far removed from the picturesque cobblestone streets we often envision today. Imagine, if you can, the burgh of Edinburgh during the late 1200s. Narrow, winding alleys barely accommodating a cart meandered up the steep slope towards the formidable castle that perched atop the rocky prominence. The atmosphere was thick with smoke from numerous hearths, the pungent scent of tanned hides mingling with the less pleasant odours of human and animal waste accumulating in the gutters. The buildings themselves appeared to lean inwards, their upper levels stretching out over the thoroughfares below, creating an everlasting twilight at street level. Timber-framed edifices with gaps filled with wattle and daub were crammed together so tightly that a blaze in one structure could swiftly engulf entire sections. And fires were a frequent occurrence, whether ignited by a toppled candle, a spark from a smithy, or a malicious act by raiders seeking to instill fear. This led to a new form of struggle for the merchant class. Within these urban centres, a new societal class began to take shape. The merchants and artisans who were essential to the development of Scotland's burgeoning economy comprised both men and women who had freed themselves from the direct chains of serfdom. Nevertheless, they faced challenges that were just as formidable as those experienced by their rural peers. Take, for example, the tale of Robert, a wool merchant who had carved out a niche for himself in the town of Stirling. Born into a peasant family, his father worked tirelessly behind a plough. Yet, through a blend of cleverness, diligence, and a fair bit of good fortune, Robert accumulated enough wealth to buy his freedom and start a modest trading enterprise. His mornings began before sunrise as he navigated the muddy streets to assess the latest wool shipments from the nearby countryside. The quality of the fleeces varied greatly. Some were thick and glossy, ideal for the high-end cloth that would command premium prices in the markets of Flanders. In contrast, others were rough and filthy, fit only for the coarsest clothing worn by labourers and the peasantry. This line of work was fraught with danger. Bandits lurked along the routes between towns, ever ready to relieve an unsuspecting trader of both goods and life. Having learned from experience, Robert travelled in groups when he could and carried a sword that he was skilled in wielding. He had witnessed too many fellow merchants set off with aspirations, only to later be found stripped bare and abandoned for the scavenger birds. However, the threats didn't stop at highway robberies. The very essence of medieval trade was riddled with unpredictability. A vessel carrying valuable cargo could succumb to a tempest, or a storehouse brimming with goods could be consumed by flames. A lord might impose fresh taxes or seize a merchant's entire stock on baseless accusations. Over the years, Robert had endured his fair share of these calamities. He had observed his carefully saved wealth dissipate overnight, leaving him to begin anew from scratch. The weight of this turmoil had taken a toll on him, causing him to age far beyond his years. His hair had greyed before reaching his 40s, and prominent lines were, for women in medieval urban life, existence in Scottish towns presented both opportunities and risks that were largely absent in rural settings. While peasant women were indeed oppressed, their roles were delineated by centuries of tradition. On the other hand, urban women found themselves navigating a more intricate and often hostile atmosphere. Some women succeeded in establishing themselves as prominent traders or artisans. There were female brewers known as alewives who provided a significant portion of the beer consumed in medieval towns. Some women took on the role of seamstresses, crafting exquisite garments for affluent merchants and their families. Others ran taverns or boarding houses, offering meals and accommodations to travellers. However, prosperity often came with significant challenges. Women in commerce faced ongoing scrutiny and harassment. They were often accused of using sorcery to draw in customers, tampering with their goods, or engaging in prostitution. Even a minor mistake could lead to severe public disgrace, substantial fines, or worse consequences. Consider the case of Margaret the A.R.W. wife, who successfully built a bustling brewery in the Burgh of Perth. She inherited the establishment from her deceased spouse and, through dedication and savvy negotiations, had considerably grown the business. Her ale gained a reputation throughout the area for its exceptional quality and potency. Unfortunately, Margaret's achievements attracted unwarranted scrutiny. Competing brewers circulated tales that she was watering down her ale with contaminated water from the town's tainted wells. Religious leaders suggested that her extraordinary success could only be attributed to deals with malevolent forces. When several patrons fell ill after consuming her ale, likely due to reasons entirely unrelated to the brewing process, Margaret faced accusations of poisoning. The trial was a farce. She underwent the ordeal by water being cast into the river to determine if she would float, which would signify her guilt as a witch. When she nearly drowned and had to be rescued from the water, this was interpreted as proof of her innocence regarding witchcraft. Nonetheless, the harm to her reputation was irreparable. Her clients deserted her, her business crumbled, and she passed away in poverty. A few years later, the spectre of violence loomed. Violence was a constant threat in medieval Scottish towns, as it was in rural areas. The population density, wealth, and competing interests created numerous avenues for conflict. Street brawls were frequent, often arising from business disagreements, personal affronts, or mere intoxication. The cramped alleys and ineffective law enforcement meant these clashes could swiftly escalate into significant riots. Weapons were easily accessible. Most men carried at least a knife, with many armed with swords or other war implements. The nighttime brought additional hazards. Most towns enforced curfews intended to keep citizens indoors after dark, although these rules were frequently overlooked or poorly upheld. Thieves and murderers roamed the dark streets, targeting anyone reckless enough to walk alone. It was not uncommon for the bodies of homicide victims to be found in alleys and back streets, their wallets stolen and throats cut. Even the local authorities were often corrupt and brutal. Town guards supplemented their meager salaries through bribes from criminals or by engaging in theft and extortion themselves. Judges could be influenced financially, making justice more contingent on one's wealth than the actual details of the case. Urban settings were also hotbeds of religious strife, as the concentration of wealth and power made these areas prime targets for religious and political unrest. The church had a significant presence within most towns, with cathedrals, monasteries, and parish churches vying for influence and resources. However, the urban landscape also encouraged the emergence of new religious expressions that sometimes clashed with orthodox authorities. Heretical movements thrived among literate merchants and craftsmen who had gained exposure to fresh ideas through trade. The Lollards, followers of the English reformer John Wycliffe, began to establish a presence in several Scottish towns during the 14th and 15th centuries. These religious dissenters questioned the Catholic Church's authority, asserting that individuals could establish a direct connection with God without needing priests as intermediaries. Such notions posed significant risks during a time when adherence to religious norms was crucial for maintaining societal stability. Individuals accused of heresy faced scrutiny from church officials, often enduring torture to extract confessions, and if they stood firm in their beliefs, they could face execution by fire. The tale of James Resby exemplifies the consequences awaiting religious dissenters. Resby, an English laird who made his way to Scotland around 1407, preached the doctrines of Wycliffe in the burghs of Edinburgh and St Andrews. He garnered attention among educated townsfolk attracted to his calls for religious reform. However, Resby's actions soon caught the eye of the authorities. He was apprehended, charged with heresy, and sentenced to death. In 1407, he was executed by burning in Perth, becoming one of the early Protestant martyrs in Scottish history. His execution served as a stark warning to anyone who might contemplate questioning established religious beliefs. The economics of survival were harsh. For the majority of urban residents, everyday existence involved a relentless battle to earn enough to subsist. Unlike rural peasants who had the advantage of small plots of land for food cultivation, townspeople relied entirely on a cash-based economy. This reliance rendered them susceptible to economic shifts beyond their influence. A bad harvest could cause food prices to soar, making basic necessities unaffordable for city workers. Political unrest could disrupt trade networks, leaving merchants and artisans without work. Furthermore, currency devaluations by royal authorities could obliterate savings overnight. The narrative of Thomas the Weaver highlights the vulnerable state of urban economic conditions. Thomas had spent years honing his trade, producing quality woolen textiles that were highly sought after by the affluent. He had managed to accumulate enough funds to buy his own loom and establish a small workshop in the Burgh of Aberdeen. For several years, Thomas thrived. His textiles gained fame for their exceptional quality, and he received more orders than he was able to manage. This success enabled him to train apprentices, broaden his workshop, and even buy a modest home for his family. However, calamity struck. A conflict between England and Scotland disrupted the wool trade, severing Thomas's access to raw materials. Simultaneously, competition from Flemish weavers resulted in a significant drop in the prices of finished textiles. Thomas found himself squeezed between escalating expenses and diminishing income. Within a year, he had lost it all. He had to part with his loom, let go of his apprentices, and relocate his family to a single room above a pub. He spent his remaining days as a labourer, handling cargo at the docks and taking any odd jobs available. The skills that once brought him prosperity had become worthless in an economy that had no room for his trade. Children growing up in medieval towns faced particularly grim conditions. While those in rural areas encountered various dangers, they at least had access to open spaces and could assist their families with essential agricultural activities. In contrast, urban children were trapped in crowded and polluted habitats with limited chances for productive work. The child mortality rates in medieval towns were shocking. Poor sanitation, tainted water, and the swift spread of infectious illnesses meant that about half of all children didn't survive to adulthood. Those who did often carried the physical and emotional scars from their difficult upbringing. From as young as 7 or 8, children were pressed into labor in any way they could manage. They swept streets, delivered messages, assisted in workshops, and begged for alms. This work was frequently perilous. Kids working close to forges risked burns from hot metal. Those involved in construction could be crushed under falling stones. Meanwhile, children laboring on the docks faced the danger of drowning in the murky harbor waters. Education was primarily accessible to the children of wealthy families, and even then, it was quite limited. A vast majority of urban youth grew up unable to read or write, often lacking even the ability to spell their own names. This absence of education effectively confined them to cycles of poverty, preventing any chance of moving beyond the most basic and degrading jobs. The tale of young Mary, an orphan in medieval Glasgow, encapsulates the struggles of city children. After losing her parents to a plague outbreak at the age of 6, Mary was left to navigate the streets alone. To survive, she resorted to begging, stealing, and taking on any minor tasks that came her way. Sleeping in doorways and deserted buildings, she fought through constant cold and hunger. Learning to distrust adults, she faced many who sought to exploit her vulnerability. She endured beatings from shopkeepers who caught her trying to steal bread, was chased by dogs, and was preyed upon by men intent on taking advantage of her plight. Despite these adversities, Mary managed to persevere into adulthood. Eventually, she secured a position as a servant in a merchant's household, gaining the stability of regular meals and shelter. However, the years of hardship had left their mark. She was frail and sickly, her youthful spirit wearing down from the relentless struggle for survival. The rise of banking and credit came alongside the expansion of medieval Scottish towns, which grew in economic significance. The ongoing demand for credit to support trade and production led to the establishment of primitive banking systems. Italian merchants, with their advanced grasp of finance, were instrumental in this transformation. They opened branches of their banks in key Scottish boroughs, providing loans to merchants and facilitating international commerce. Yet for the average townspeople, access to credit remained scarce and costly. Most had no choice but to turn to local moneylenders who demanded exorbitant interest rates and employed ruthless means to collect debts. Those who fell behind on their bills risked having all their belongings seized and being thrown into debtor's prison. The Church officially denounced usury, the practice of charging interest on loans, considering it a sin against God. Nonetheless, this ban was frequently disregarded, and even church-run institutions often participated in lending money under the guise of other transactions. The rise of credit relations also spawned new social tensions. Debtors and creditors found themselves in a web of mutual dependence and distrust. A merchant who extended too much credit could face bankruptcy if customers failed to pay. A craftsman who borrowed funds to grow their business might end up enslaved to creditors if the endeavor faltered. Despite their detachment from agricultural life, urban communities in the medieval era still functioned under seasonal patterns that influenced every part of their daily lives. Winter posed specific difficulties as food became less available and more costly, while chilly, damp conditions worsened health issues. With winter on the horizon, townsfolk launched into a flurry of preparations. Merchants hoarded supplies that could be hard to come by in the harsh months to come. Craftsmen extended their working hours to fulfill orders before the days grew shorter and colder conditions hindered their productivity. Families gathered any fuel they could afford, be it wood, peat, or coal, to keep their homes warm. Yet, even with these preparations, winter remained a period of hardship for the urban poor. Those with unstable jobs struggled to earn during the coldest months. As food stocks dwindled, prices soared, leaving many families torn between heating their homes and caring for their children. Spring brought a welcome change, but also fresh challenges. The thawing snow and increased rainfall frequently led to flooding in low-lying town areas. The already muddy and foul streets became nearly impassable. Disease outbreaks were frequent as contaminated water circulated through urban areas. The summer season provided optimal chances for economic endeavors, but it also brought specific hazards. The heat made working conditions in workshops and forges nearly intolerable. Without refrigeration, food spoiled rapidly, resulting in regular instances of food poisoning. Additionally, the arid conditions heightened the risk of fires, capable of devastating entire neighborhoods in mere hours. The autumn season was characterized by both harvest and anxiety. While the surrounding farms might yield plentiful crops, townsfolk had to vie with rural inhabitants for access to food resources. Merchants, who had speculated on grain futures, faced either prosperity or ruin depending on the success of the harvest. In the harsh reality of medieval Scottish towns, taverns and alehouses fulfilled essential social roles. They provided not only sustenance and drink, but also warmth, camaraderie, and a momentary escape from the relentless trials of everyday life. Typically managed by women, the alewives, these establishments brewed the beer that served as the main beverage for most urban dwellers. With water often being unsafe to drink, weak ale became a viable substitute that offered both hydration and calories. However, taverns were also hubs of vice and violence. Gambling was prevalent, often leading to altercations over debts or accusations of cheating. Prostitutes worked in many alehouses, contributing to the complex social dynamics. Moreover, the consumption of alcohol frequently led to brawls that could spill into the streets. Authorities regarded taverns with considerable suspicion. They were perceived as breeding grounds for unrest, where dissatisfied craftsmen and laborers might assemble to conspire against their superiors. Frequent raids by town guards were common, and tavern owners had to strike a careful balance between serving patrons and steering clear of legal troubles. Medical treatment in medieval cities. Although medieval urban centers provided some benefits over rural areas regarding medical care accessibility, the truth was that most city inhabitants received minimal effective treatment for their ailments. The limited number of trained doctors in Scottish boroughs mainly served affluent merchants and nobility. Common townsfolk relied on a motley assortment of barber surgeons, wise women, and charlatans for their healthcare needs. Barber surgeons were capable of performing basic tasks like extracting teeth and bloodletting. However, their knowledge of anatomy and diseases was very rudimentary. Wise women employed herbal remedies and traditional wisdom passed down through generations, whereas quacks exploited the vulnerable by selling useless concoctions and promising miraculous recoveries. The dense population in towns also facilitated the rapid spread of epidemics. The Black Death stands out as the most infamous among various outbreaks that repeatedly ravaged urban communities. Smallpox, typhus, and influenza were frequent visitors of medieval towns, each leaving trails of death and despair behind. Hospitals, when they did exist, were generally religious institutions that prioritized spiritual healing over physical care. Patients were often expected to pray for their recovery while enduring treatments that could be more harmful than beneficial. The understanding of hygiene was severely lacking, with hospitals posing as much risk as the illnesses they aimed to treat: crime and justice in urban settings. The amalgamation of wealth and large populations in medieval towns inevitably resulted in heightened criminal activity. Theft was the predominant crime, varying from petty pickpocketing to significant burglaries of merchant establishments. Punishments for theft were harsh and frequently brutal. Minor infractions might lead to public humiliation, with thieves being confined in stocks or pillories where townsfolk were encouraged to throw rotten food or worse at them. More severe offences could lead to severe penalties, such as mutilation, loss of a hand or ear, or even death. Homicide was surprisingly frequent in medieval towns, often stemming from business disagreements, personal resentments, or mere drunken altercations. Due to the absence of effective policing, justice often relied on personal retribution rather than a legal framework. While courts were established, they were frequently corrupt and ineffective. Judges were susceptible to bribery, witnesses faced intimidation, and evidence could be manipulated. Wealthy individuals with connections often evaded consequences for serious crimes, while the less fortunate faced harsh punishments for trivial infractions. The notion of rehabilitation was almost entirely absent. Punishment was viewed mainly as a means of deterrence and retribution, rather than as a chance for reform. This method did little to decrease crime rates and might have even fueled more violent and desperate criminal activities. As the political struggle for representation unfolded, the residents of economically rising medieval Scottish towns began to push for more political inclusion. Merchants and artisans grew restless under the rule of feudal lords who had little comprehension of urban realities and cared even less for the needs of the townsfolk. The establishment of burgh councils marked the dawn of urban self-governance in Scotland. These councils, primarily composed of affluent merchants, were accorded limited powers to oversee trade, maintain order, and collect taxes within their areas. However, political authority remained largely in the hands of a small elite. The overwhelming majority of townspeople, including labourers, servants, and small-scale craftsmen, had no say in governance. This disenfranchisement led to sporadic uprisings and riots as the urban populace sought to claim their rights against their social superiors. The events of the Craftsmen's Uprising in Edinburgh in 1513 exemplify these underlying tensions. The city's artisans, spearheaded by the deacons of various guilds, requested increased representation within the town council and a say in local governance. When their appeals were dismissed, they took to the streets in a violent uprising. This rebellion was ruthlessly crushed by forces aligned with the burgh's merchant elite. Several craftsmen faced execution while many others were imprisoned or exiled, resulting in the guilds losing a significant amount of their political power. The implications were unmistakable. Political authority would remain firmly in the hands of those who already held economic power. Turning to cultural life in medieval towns, it's evident that despite the myriad challenges and threats associated with urban living, medieval Scottish towns emerged as hubs of cultural flourishing. The amalgamation of wealth and literacy cultivated audiences for innovative artistic expressions. Travelling minstrels and storytellers found eager listeners in urban taverns and market squares, delivering news from afar, providing entertainment for the weary, and establishing connections to the wider world beyond the city's confines. Religious festivals offered platforms for grand pageants and performances. Mystery plays depicting biblical narratives were presented in town squares during holy observances, involving entire communities and serving both entertainment and religious education for largely illiterate crowds. Furthermore, the advent of guild systems encouraged various forms of artistic accomplishment. Artisans took pride in their craft, producing items that embodied both functionality and aesthetics. Goldsmiths, stone sculptors, and textile artisans created masterpieces that rivaled those from larger European centres. As for the urban experience, life in medieval Scottish towns was beset by the same brutality and hardships seen in rural areas. However, it manifested in unique and distinctive ways. The aggregation of people, wealth, and power generated opportunities for advancement that were largely lacking in the countryside. However, this situation also led to fresh forms of conflict and suffering. Urban residents encountered distinct challenges: the ever-present dangers of fire and disease, the instability of market economies, the corruption within legal and political frameworks, and the social strife stemming from extreme inequality. Nonetheless, they were also integral in fostering new modes of community, culture, and economic structure that would ultimately reshape Scottish society. The medieval burg embodied both the potential and the dangers of human civilization. It illustrated what individuals could achieve through collaboration, yet it also exposed the depths of cruelty and exploitation that characterized human interactions in a time devoid of effective justice or social support systems. As we contemplate these urban experiences, we again witness the remarkable resilience of ordinary individuals confronting extraordinary trials. The merchants who restored their businesses after significant setbacks. The artisans who upheld their pride and craftsmanship amid economic volatility. The women who carved out niches for themselves within hostile settings. And the children who somehow made it to adulthood against tremendous odds. Each of these exemplifies the unyielding human spirit that allowed medieval civilization to endure and ultimately thrive. The harsh reality of life for medieval Scots, whether in rural areas or urban centres, was undeniably brutal. Yet it was also punctuated by moments of innovation, compassion, and bravery, highlighting the inherent dignity of human existence even during the most challenging times. These narratives from Scotland's cities enrich our comprehension of how our ancestors lived, fought, and ultimately triumphed over forces that aimed to extinguish their spirits. In today's world, as we confront our own difficulties and uncertainties, we may find motivation in these ancient urbanites who established communities founded on mutual support in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. Their influence endures not merely through the tangible structures they built, but also in the institutions, customs, and principles that still mold Scottish society today. The harsh existence of Neanderthals. Part 8. The ceaseless fight for survival in the Neanderthal realm involved more than just procuring sustenance or evading threats. Perhaps the most insidious adversary they faced was one invisible and incomprehensible: disease. In an era devoid of medicine, lacking comprehension of sanitation, and without even the notion of contagion, sickness struck suddenly and without mercy, claiming lives with terrifying efficiency. Envision a Neanderthal group gathered around their fire as winter's chill tightened its grasp over the land. The oldest member, a seasoned woman bearing marks from countless forages and hunts, starts to cough. Initially, it appears trivial, maybe smoke from the fire or the chill air irritating her throat. Yet as time passes, her cough worsens, becoming moist and harsh. Her breath becomes strained, her skin radiates with fever, and soon others begin to display similar symptoms. This exemplified the horrific reality of respiratory illnesses in the Neanderthal domain. What we now recognize as pneumonia, tuberculosis, or even the common cold could wipe out a whole group. Their closely knit living situations, which provided warmth and safety, transformed into death traps as contagious illnesses took hold. Families that had triumphed over mammoth hunts and cave bear encounters found themselves defenseless against unseen pathogens they could not fathom. Archaeological findings depict a somber view of Neanderthal health. Skeletal remains exhibit distinct signs of chronic respiratory ailments, with damaged ribs and spinal deformities indicating prolonged episodes of severe coughing. Some individuals reveal signs of tuberculosis, a condition that would have meant a slow and painful demise in their reality. The infection would have gradually deteriorated their lungs over months or even years, leaving them breathless as they attempted to maintain their wandering lifestyle. Yet respiratory illnesses were merely one aspect of the numerous health crises that afflicted Neanderthal groups. Their communities were overrun by parasitic infections, with roundworms, tapeworms, and various intestinal parasites compromising their already strained health by siphoning vital nutrients from their limited diets. The persistent presence of these parasites ensured that, even when food was plentiful, Neanderthals frequently experienced malnutrition and chronic fatigue. Analysis of Neanderthal coprolites, or fossilized feces, uncovers the alarming severity of these parasitic issues. Certain samples harbor so many parasite eggs that researchers believe the individuals must have endured extraordinarily high worm burdens, leading to severe anemia, abdominal discomfort, and digestive complications. Imagine chasing a woolly rhinoceros while being tormented by parasites, with every movement sapping your energy. The evidence implies that some Neanderthal bands created rudimentary remedies for these conditions. Traces of medicinal plants have been discovered in their dental calculus, the plaque that hardens on teeth. Yarrow and chamomile, both recognized for their anti-inflammatory and pain-relieving effects, seem to have been consumed regularly by certain individuals. This signifies an impressive level of plant knowledge and suggests that Neanderthals developed their own primitive form of medicine. Even more fascinating is the find of birch bark tar at some Neanderthal locations. This substance, which requires advanced heating methods for its creation, has notable antiseptic qualities. The fact that Neanderthals undertook the complicated process of producing this tar indicates their understanding of its medicinal benefits. They might have utilized it for healing injuries, fighting infections, or even as a rudimentary form of chewing gum to support dental hygiene. Yet, their medical endeavors were frequently overshadowed by the harshness of their surroundings. Injuries were an ever-present aspect of Neanderthal existence. Analysis of skeletal remains frequently reveals broken bones, dislocated joints, and serious head trauma. A notably studied skeleton, known as Shanidar 1, exhibits signs of multiple severe injuries, including a deformed arm, a blind eye, and a skull fracture that was partially healed. Despite these afflictions, this Neanderthal lived for years, indicating that his community provided care for him despite his limitations. This attention to those who were injured or disabled stands out as one of the most extraordinary features of Neanderthal culture. At the Sema de los Huesos site in Spain, a Neanderthal child's remains were discovered, exhibiting craniosynostosis, a condition characterized by the premature fusion of skull bones, leading to significant developmental challenges. This child survived for several years, an achievement that would have been impossible without the devoted support of the group. They would have provided him with food, shelter, and carried him as they traversed their environment. Although he couldn't aid in their survival, such kindness came with immense sacrifices in a world where every calorie was vital and any sign of frailty could lead to death. Nevertheless, Neanderthal communities consistently made this choice, aiding individuals who could no longer hunt or forage. In Chapelle, France, archaeologists uncovered the remains of an elderly Neanderthal male who had lost most of his teeth and was plagued by severe arthritis. He had become a burden for years, unable to consume tough meat or participate in hunts. Yet, his community sustained him until he passed away from natural causes. This compassion also extended to intricate burial practices, indicating profound emotional connections and perhaps even notions of an afterlife. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, scientists uncovered indications that Neanderthals interred their dead with flowers. Examination of pollen samples found near the graves indicates that the deceased were laid to rest on beds of vibrant blossoms. While some researchers debate whether this represented a deliberate burial practice or if it resulted from natural pollen interference, the deliberate arrangement of the bodies and the presence of grave offerings at various sites strongly imply ritualistic behavior. The toll on their mental health from their harsh existence is significant. Contemporary studies of hunter-gatherer societies reveal elevated rates of depression and anxiety, even in relatively stable settings. For Neanderthals, who were consistently threatened by predators, harsh weather, and starvation, the psychological strain must have been immense. Certain skeletal remains show signs of stress-related conditions such as cortical hyperestosis, which is abnormal bone growth that can be prompted by chronic stress and malnutrition. Perhaps the most devastating health crisis confronting Neanderthals was their intrinsic genetic susceptibility. Existing in small, isolated groups over millennia created a severe genetic bottleneck. Inbreeding was prevalent and, along with it, a variety of genetic disorders that weakened their survival capabilities. Analyses of Neanderthal DNA reveal a decrease in genetic diversity compared to contemporary humans, making them more vulnerable to illnesses and less adaptable to environmental shifts. Their seclusion also meant that when modern humans began to migrate into Europe approximately 45,000 years ago, Neanderthals had no defense against the diseases carried by these newcomers. Similar to the catastrophic epidemics that would later affect Native American populations following European contact, novel pathogens introduced by modern humans could have ravaged Neanderthal communities long before direct competition for resources posed a threat. The evidence supporting this disease-driven decline is circumstantial yet persuasive. Neanderthal populations began to dwindle around the same time modern humans entered their regions. Evidence from archaeological sites indicates a sudden abandonment, with tools and hearths left behind as if the inhabitants had simply disappeared. Though climate change and resource competition certainly contributed to their extinction, the unseen threat of epidemic diseases may have dealt the final blow. In their last millennia, as their numbers shrank and isolation increased, Neanderthals faced a harsh irony. The social connections and care for the ill that made them uniquely human also left them exposed to disease transmission. Their tight-knit family units, their compassion for the elderly and disabled, and their shared living arrangements all became conduits for death when epidemics emerged. The remaining Neanderthal groups desperately holding on in caves scattered across Spain and southern Europe were likely mere shadows of their once thriving communities. Weakened by inbreeding, afflicted by illness, and confronted with environmental changes, they watched their world shrink until only small bands remained. The archaeological findings from these final locations suggest a state of urgent improvisation. Makeshift tools hastily crafted from available materials imply that traditional knowledge was fading as communities disintegrated. When the last Neanderthal passed away roughly 40,000 years ago, likely in a cave in southern Spain, they not only took with them their own lineage, but also the accumulated knowledge of hundreds of thousands of years of surviving in Ice Age Europe, including their expertise in medicinal plants, understanding of seasonal cycles, and methods of hunting large game. All of this vanished alongside them, leaving behind only scattered fossils and stone tools as a testament to their struggle. Yet in a surprising turn of events, Neanderthals did not completely fade away. Modern genetic research has shown that the majority of individuals with European and Asian ancestry possess traces of Neanderthal DNA, usually ranging from 2 to 4% of their genetic makeup. This genetic heritage indicates that there was interbreeding between Neanderthals and contemporary humans during the extensive period they shared the planet. Interestingly, some of these inherited Neanderthal genes seem to offer resistance against specific diseases, suggesting that their genetic input may have aided the survival of our own species. The narrative surrounding Neanderthal health and illness ultimately reflects the complex nature of human compassion, manifested in their care for the ill and disabled, their emotional connections, and their intricate social systems. These characteristics, which made them undeniably human, also rendered them susceptible in ways that purely survival-driven tactics might not have. They opted for empathy instead of efficiency, prioritizing community over harsh individualism, thereby cultivating both their greatest strength and their significant vulnerability. As we examine these ancient relatives from across the immense expanse of time, we observe in their struggles a mirror of our ongoing fight against diseases and mortality. Their rudimentary medical practices, their attention to those in need, and their refusal to forsake the frail resonate within our contemporary healthcare systems and social support frameworks. Through their compassion, we uncover the foundational elements of our own humanity. Although Neanderthals ultimately lost the struggle for existence, they bestowed upon us something far more significant than genetic remnants. They demonstrated that being human transcends intellect, technology, or mere survival abilities. It encompasses the choice to care for one another, even when such care entails substantial sacrifices. In their remains, in their burial sites, and in their desperate efforts to heal, assist, and remain unified as communities, we discern the model for what it genuinely means to be human. Their harsh existence filled with illness and mortality ultimately imparted lessons to them, and subsequently to us, that surviving is not merely about who is the strongest, but rather about the deep connections shared among individuals. By confronting the unseen foe of disease with only rudimentary medicine and unwavering devotion to each other, Neanderthals penned the initial chapter in humanity's enduring quest to conquer death itself. Although they were ultimately unable to win that fight, their spirit of empathy and caregiving persists in every hospital, every gracious gesture towards the ill, and every decision we make to prioritize human dignity over simple survival. The echoes of their struggles resonate through every modern pandemic, serving as a reminder that disease has perpetually been humanity's foremost adversary, and that our most powerful defense has consistently been our readiness to take care of one another, regardless of the cost. While reflecting on the available insights and building upon the previously established narrative style, we delve into Part 9 of the Neanderthal experience. Even amidst such overwhelming adversity and anguish, the Neanderthals exhibited extraordinary traits that highlight their remarkable humanity. Archaeological findings show a species capable of profound compassion, one that nurtured its most vulnerable members with a kindness that challenges our primitive perceptions. At the Shanidar cave in Iraq, researchers unearthed the remains of a Neanderthal male who lived for numerous years despite encountering significant challenges, such as a withered arm, blindness in one eye, and other serious physical impairments. This individual, referred to as Shanidar I, could never have survived independently in the harsh Neanderthal environment. His very existence serves as evidence that his community opted to care for him, sharing their valuable resources with someone who was unable to contribute significantly to their survival. They provided him sustenance, safeguarded him, and ensured he reached old age during an era when even the most robust individuals struggled to achieve their 40th year. This case of Neanderthal compassion was anything but unique. Across their regions, stretching from Spain to Siberia, there is clear evidence showcasing individuals who endured severe injuries, reliant on their communities for survival. Bones that mended appropriately indicate attentive care, while elderly individuals without teeth lived for extended periods despite their inability to consume difficult-to-eat foods, suggesting that others either pre-chewed their meals or offered softer alternatives. These acts were not mere instances of goodwill, but rather reflective of a structured system of caregiving, highlighting a species that shared profound emotional connections and moral duties towards one another. Furthermore, Neanderthals established advanced burial customs that underscore their emotional and spiritual complexity. At the site of La Chapelle-aux-Sun in France, they thoughtfully buried their dead in specially dug graves, arranging the bodies with care and covering them with stones. Certain graves exhibit signs of burial offerings, including tools and animal bones carefully placed with the deceased, implying beliefs regarding an afterlife, or at the very least, a wish to honor those who had passed. The notable burial at Shanadar 4 appeared to have contained traces of flower pollen, leading some researchers to suggest that Neanderthals may have adorned their deceased with wildflowers, although this idea is still under dispute. Regardless of whether flowers were used, the meticulous treatment of their dead indicates a species grappling with mortality, grief, and the essence of life itself. Their ability for symbolic thought extended well beyond funerary rites. Neanderthals are credited with creating the earliest known cave art, showcasing abstract designs and handprints on cave walls in Spain over 65,000 years ago. They fashioned jewelry from eagle talons and shells, creating necklaces and pendants that served no practical function beyond personal decoration or symbolic expression. Utilizing pigments such as red ochre and manganese dioxide, they adorned their bodies and possibly their tools, engaging in actions that reflect aesthetic appreciation and symbolic reasoning. Moreover, music may have played a role in their challenging existence. Neanderthals are credited with crafting what seems to be the oldest known musical instrument, a bone flute unearthed in Slovenia, dating back over 50,000 years. The carefully positioned holes carved into the cave, bare bone, indicate a grasp of musical scales and deliberate sound creation. Around their fires in the cool darkness of their caves, during sporadic breaks from their relentless fight for survival, they possibly composed tunes that provided solace, nurtured social connections, or expressed emotions that words could not capture. Their intellect shone through their increasingly advanced tool-making techniques. Initially, Neanderthal tools were quite basic, but they eventually evolved into the Mousterian tool tradition, where they designed specialized instruments for hunting, preparing food, and crafting. They mastered the ability to control fire, using it not only for warmth and cooking, but also for hardening the tips of wooden spears and producing birch bark tar, which served as a glue for securing stone tools to wooden shafts. This tar-making process required heating birch bark to specific temperatures in low-oxygen environments, illustrating a complex chemical process that involved foresight, skill, and knowledge of material properties. Additionally, Neanderthals were proficient hunters who devised intricate strategies for taking down large Ice Age megafauna. They worked together in coordinated hunts to drive mammoths off cliffs or into makeshift traps. They fashioned wooden spears with fire-hardened tips, capable of piercing thick hides and bringing down prey much larger than themselves. At excavation sites like Lascarina in Germany, archaeologists have discovered Neanderthal hunting spears lodged in the rib cage of a straight-tusked elephant, showcasing their bravery and expertise against such daunting challenges. Their social structures were intricate and multifaceted, comprising extended family units that collaborated in hunting, child-rearing, and sharing resources. They established social hierarchies and distinct roles, with evidence indicating that some individuals specialized in tool production, while others were adept at hunting or gathering. They formed collaborative relationships between groups, exchanging resources such as high-quality stone over vast distances. Genetic research suggests that they steered clear of inbreeding, by selecting mates from far-off communities, indicating social networks that extended across significant territories despite the difficulties posed by Ice Age travel. Language likely served as a unifying force within their communities. While the exact methods of communication used by Neanderthals remain uncertain, their hyoid bones, critical for speech and supporting the tongue, were nearly identical to those of modern humans. Their brain structures included regions linked to language processing, and their intricate tool-making alongside complex social interactions would have necessitated advanced forms of communication. They might have possessed a diverse vocabulary to articulate their surroundings, emotions, and social ties, transmitting knowledge through oral traditions that ensured vital survival information was passed down through generations. Neanderthals demonstrated a remarkable ability to innovate, adapting to various environments as they spread throughout Eurasia. They formulated region-specific tools and strategies tailored to local conditions. Those in coastal regions became proficient in harvesting shellfish and marine life, while forest-dwelling groups excelled at hunting woodland animals and processing plant-based foods. Populations in Arctic areas developed specialized cold weather gear and hunting methods to endure some of the planet's harshest climates. This adaptability showcases a species capable of creative problem-solving and the cultural transmission of knowledge. Yet despite their extraordinary abilities, intelligence, empathy, artistic expression, and technological advancements, the Neanderthals ultimately confronted a foe they could not overcome: change itself. As the last ice age began to recede around 45,000 years ago, the world of the Neanderthals underwent a dramatic transformation. The colossal glaciers that had defined their habitats for hundreds of thousands of years started to melt away, disrupting climate conditions, plant ecosystems, and animal numbers in ways that upended their accustomed methods of survival. At the same time, modern humans, or Homo sapiens, appeared on the scene, bringing with them advanced technologies, new social structures, and innovative survival methods that turned out to be highly effective. These newcomers introduced tools that provided significant advantages: more advanced projectile weapons capable of striking from longer distances, improved hunting strategies that allowed for greater caloric returns from the same resources, and broader social networks that enhanced their resilience in times of crisis. They also introduced unfamiliar diseases to which the Neanderthals had no defense, pathogens that spread through communities already weakened by environmental strain and competition for resources. The closing millennia of Neanderthal existence were characterized by increasing isolation and demographic decline. Their populations, which were always small, splintered into even tinier groups dispersed across an increasingly harsh environment. In their last strongholds in southern Spain and Gibraltar, the remnants of Neanderthal communities managed to survive for several millennia after their northern counterparts had disappeared. However, by 28,000 years ago, even these last survivors could not withstand the unyielding pressures of a transforming world. The extinction of the Neanderthals stands as one of the most significant losses in human history. With their demise vanished hundreds of thousands of years of accumulated wisdom, unique worldviews, and forms of being human that remain almost unimaginable to us. Their exit left modern humans as the only remaining human species, carrying forward merely fragments of the Neanderthal legacy encoded in our DNA and preserved in the archaeological record. Today, as we uncover their narrative through scattered remains, ancient implements, and genetic traces, it becomes clearer that the Neanderthals were far from the brutish, primitive beings often depicted in popular culture. Instead, they were an advanced human species that confronted unimaginable hardships with exceptional resilience, intellect, and grace. Their harsh existence was also infused with deep significance, characterized by love, grief, creativity, and optimism. In their fight for survival against daunting challenges, in their support for one another, and in their quiet moments of awe and beauty, they exemplify the essence of humanity. Although the Neanderthals have vanished, their influence persists in both tangible and profound ways. The small fraction of Neanderthal DNA present in the genomes of non-African populations today carries forward their genetic legacy, serving as a biological testament to our shared humanity. Every act of kindness toward the vulnerable, every artistic endeavor created solely for beauty's sake, and every moment in which we choose to support one another, regardless of the sacrifice involved, honors the memory of our lost relatives who faced a harsh world with bravery, intellect, and steadfast dedication to their communities. Their narrative is our narrative, a tribute to the tenacity of the human spirit and a reminder that even when faced with daunting obstacles, life discovers a way to cultivate meaning, beauty, and connections. The harsh existence of the Neanderthals was, in its unique way, a beautiful journey. By remembering them, we also reflect on something fundamental about ourselves. As the flickering flames danced in the rudimentary stone hearths and the last whispers of conversation slipped into the night, the Neanderthal clans confronted their greatest challenge. Despite their resilience, strong social ties, and clever adaptations to an unforgiving environment, they could not elude the relentless forces that ultimately dictated their destiny. The climate was undergoing significant changes once again, yet this time the alterations were far more severe and unpredictable than any occurrences faced by their ancestors. Ice sheets would advance and recede alarmingly often, transforming well-known hunting territories into desolate ice fields or submerging them under rising ocean levels. The megafauna that had been a critical source of sustenance for millennia began to vanish. Some species succumbed to extinction due to the shifting environmental conditions, while others relocated to areas the Neanderthals could not access. More importantly, they were no longer the only ones vying for survival. New challenges emerged from the south and east. Anatomically modern humans, equipped with their own advanced tools, established social structures, and an unyielding instinct to survive. These newcomers introduced innovations previously unseen by the Neanderthals: projectile weapons capable of striking from afar, intricate trade networks that sprawled across vast distances, and a remarkable ability for abstract thought and communication that surpassed the capabilities of the Neanderthals. Competition for resources intensified. Armed with superior long-range hunting methods and more effective social organization, modern humans gradually monopolized the prime hunting grounds and shelters. Their ability to coordinate expansive hunting parties over greater distances enabled them to hunt the dwindling herds of mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses with devastating efficiency. For Neanderthal clans already strained from generations of environmental pressures and genetic bottlenecks, this competition proved too much to bear. Their already limited populations began to shatter and diminish. Isolated groups found themselves cut off from potential mates, which hastened the impacts of inbreeding and genetic drift. The diseases they had historically carried became more aggressive in their weakened condition, while new pathogens, introduced through contact with modern humans, ravaged their communities. In their final centuries, Neanderthals withdrew into increasingly inhospitable areas. Archaeological findings indicate that they made their last stand in the caverns and highlands of southern Spain and Portugal, desperately holding on to a lifestyle that had supported them for hundreds of thousands of years. Within these final sanctuaries, they preserved their time-honored customs, meticulously fashioning their stone tools, interring their deceased with grave goods, and gathering around fires to exchange stories and knowledge passed through countless generations. The conclusion, when it arrived, was not a sudden disaster but a slow decline. Gradually, the isolated groups fell victim to the cumulative effects of climate change, diseases, and competition. The last embers of Neanderthal fires flickered out around 40,000 years ago, although some isolated tribes may have lingered in remote enclaves for several millennia longer. Nonetheless, their demise was not utter extinction in the strictest sense. Contemporary genetic studies have shown that Neanderthals and early modern humans interbred during the millennia of their coexistence. Today, all non-African populations possess about 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA within their genomes. This genetic inheritance impacts a range of traits from immune function to hair texture and pain perception. In a tangible way, Neanderthals continue to exist in us. Their genetic material aids modern humans in adapting to elevated altitudes, combating specific illnesses, and assimilating particular nutrients. Some of their genetic variants may have afforded critical advantages as our species dispersed globally, confronting new environments and challenges that the Neanderthals had already encountered and conquered. Importantly, the Neanderthals posed significant questions about humanity itself. Their ability to show compassion, exemplified by their care for the weak and elderly, challenges the simplistic view of prehistoric savagery. Their burial customs and potential symbolic actions indicate cognitive abilities that we are just starting to comprehend. The advanced tools they crafted and their adaptability to the environment illustrate an intellect and inventiveness deserving of appreciation. The harsh existence of the Neanderthals ultimately showcases the enduring nature of the human spirit. Even when their form diverged from ours, they confronted a reality filled with unimaginable challenges, displaying bravery, resourcefulness, and an unwavering dedication to their communities. They cherished their offspring, cared for their older generations, and confronted daunting obstacles to maintain their way of life. In both their achievements and their tragic end, the Neanderthals remind us that survival is never assured, that even the most effective adaptations can become outdated, and that the boundary between flourishing and extinction can be painfully narrow. They were our relatives in the most genuine sense, co-travelers on the extensive journey of human evolution who followed a different course, yet shared our core desires for survival, community, and meaning as we navigate our own environmental hurdles and uncertainties. The narrative of the Neanderthals serves as both a cautionary tale and a source of motivation. It highlights that while adaptation and resilience are crucial, they may not solely suffice. Yet it also reveals that even amidst inevitable doom, there is dignity in the struggle, beauty in the connections we build with one another, and significance in the endeavor to safeguard what we cherish most. Although the last Neanderthal may have perished around 40,000 years ago, their legacy continues in our genes, in our relentless pursuit to comprehend our origins, and in the lasting human ability to confront adversity with bravery and empathy. By honoring their legacy, we celebrate the finest aspects of what it is to be human, regardless of the distinct evolutionary journey that has led us to this point. Here's part 11 of the brutal life of Neanderthals. As the immense ice sheets creaked and shifted over the ancient terrain, our Neanderthal ancestors confronted what may have been their most significant challenge: the emergence of modern humans in Europe approximately 45,000 years ago. This was not just another threat to evade or a tough winter to withstand. It represented a profound existential danger that would ultimately determine their fate as a species. Imagine the scene. Having adeptly adapted to the European landscapes for over 300,000 years, Neanderthal groups abruptly faced an unprecedented situation. These newcomers walked upright like them, utilized tools like them, and harnessed fire like them. However, fundamental differences would lead to catastrophic consequences in the long term. Modern humans, our direct predecessors, arrived equipped with technological advancements that conferred substantial advantages. Their stone tools were more advanced, crafted using methods that yielded sharper and more durable instruments. They created hunting tools from bones and antlers, including spear throwers that enhanced projectile speed, barbed harpoons for fishing, and needles for fashioning fitted garments from animal hides. Most importantly, these newcomers demonstrated superior organizational skills. While Neanderthals typically lived in small family units of 20 to 30 members, modern humans formed larger, more intricate social networks. They forged trade relationships that extended over hundreds of miles, exchanging high-quality stones, shells, and various materials across considerable distances. This interconnectedness enabled them to quickly share innovations and maintain genetic diversity across populations. The struggle for resources intensified and became ruthless. Both species hunted the same game, including mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, reindeer, and cave bears. Yet modern humans proved to be more effective hunters, often driving entire herds off cliffs in coordinated mass hunts that yielded vast quantities of meat and materials. Small, isolated groups are susceptible to genetic drift, inbreeding, and local disasters. A harsh winter, an outbreak of disease, or a conflict could potentially wipe out an entire band without neighboring populations to replenish their numbers. Some scholars suggest that Neanderthals may have been further hindered by their increased caloric needs. Their sturdy, muscular physiques required more sustenance than the leaner modern humans. During times of food scarcity, this metabolic demand could have pushed Neanderthal groups beyond their ability to survive, while modern human populations managed to persevere. Nevertheless, it's essential to recognize that Neanderthals were not merely passive victims of extinction. Evidence from their last refugees indicates ongoing innovation and adaptability. They created new tools, adjusted their hunting methods, and even integrated some techniques from modern humans. In certain areas, archaeological findings imply a cultural exchange and potentially peaceful coexistence that might have lasted for millennia. The last known Neanderthal groups vanished from Gibraltar roughly 28,000 years ago, although some indications suggest that isolated bands may have survived until about 24,000 years ago. Their extinction signified the end of humanity's closest sister species, leaving modern humans as the last surviving branch of what was once a richly diverse family tree of human relatives. However, the story of Neanderthal extinction is not entirely one of erasure. Beyond the genetic remnants found in our DNA, they positively influenced human culture in ways that are just starting to be explored. Archaeological evidence shows that modern humans in Europe embraced certain Neanderthal tool-making techniques and may have acquired vital survival strategies from their ancient relatives. The saga of Neanderthal extinction represents both a tragedy and a triumph. It's tragic as it marks the loss of countless years of human evolution and adaptation, an irreplaceable segment of our ancestral lineage. Small, isolated groups are susceptible to genetic drift, inbreeding, and environmental disasters. A severe winter, a disease outbreak, or conflict could potentially wipe out an entire group without neighboring populations to restore their numbers. Some researchers suggest that Neanderthals also faced disadvantages due to their increased caloric needs. Their robust, muscular physiques required more sustenance compared to the leaner modern humans. During times of food scarcity, this metabolic demand could have driven Neanderthal groups beyond their survival limits, while the populations of modern humans managed to persevere. Nevertheless, it's important to note that Neanderthals were not just passive victims of extinction. Evidence from their final abodes indicates ongoing innovation and adaptability. They created new tool-making techniques, adjusted their hunting methods, and even integrated some practices from modern humans. In certain areas, the archaeological findings imply cultural exchanges and possibly peaceful cohabitation for thousands of years. The last known Neanderthal groups vanished from Gibraltar around 28,000 years ago, although some evidence hints that isolated communities might have survived until as recently as 24,000 years ago. Their demise marked the end of humanity's last sister species, leaving modern humans as the only remaining descendants of what once was a varied family tree of human relatives. However, the extinction of Neanderthals was not absolute erasure. In addition to the genetic imprint found in our DNA, they influenced human culture in ways we are just beginning to comprehend. Archaeological sites indicate that modern humans in Europe adopted specific Neanderthal tool-making methods and may have acquired essential survival techniques from their ancient relatives. The narrative surrounding Neanderthal extinction is both tragic and triumphant. It is tragic because it signifies the loss of countless years of human evolution and adaptation, an invaluable branch of our ancestral lineage. Yet this tale also carries a note of triumph, highlighting the extraordinary resilience of our own species and the intricate, intertwined history that contributed to our identity today. As we reflect on the final moments of Neanderthal life, we find echoes of our own challenges and victories. They confronted environmental catastrophes, competed for resources, and tackled technological hurdles with the same grit and creativity that define humanity now. Their legacy persists not only in our genetic makeup, but also in the enduring human spirit that refuses to give up when faced with formidable obstacles. By unraveling the reasons behind their extinction, we uncover profound insights into the forces that influence human survival and the delicate interplay of competition and cooperation that has consistently characterized our species. Although the Neanderthals are no longer among us, their narrative continues to deepen our understanding of what it means to be human in a world that is often unpredictable and hostile. As we conclude this exploration through the depths of prehistoric existence, we are left with a deep-seated appreciation for the remarkable tenacity of our ancient relatives. The Neanderthals endured a harsh reality filled with brutal ice ages, towering predators, relentless hunger, and an unyielding struggle for survival in an unforgiving environment. Nevertheless, they thrived for more than 300,000 years, crafting sophisticated tools, caring for their ailing and elderly, and even creating the earliest known art and burial practices in human history. Although they disappeared from our planet approximately 40,000 years ago, their DNA lives on in us as a testament to their strength and adaptability. So, as you prepare to drift off to sleep tonight, consider the incredible journey of these extraordinary beings who navigated one of the most challenging eras in our planet's history. And remember, their indomitable spirit courses through our very veins.